This started when I was at my childhood friend's apartment for what was supposed to be a fun little movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while, and we were just catching up. Her place was cozy, a little disorganized, and full of girly decor, but we were in our comfiest sweatpants about to watch princess movies. Her apartment isn't the most tidy. Things are a bit scattered around, but it's clean and really authentic, which always made me feel at home. But we decided that night on ordering pizza for dinner too. She mentioned that Sherwood, someone that I hadn't met yet, would bring the pizza over. At first, I was not happy to hear that. I thought maybe that she had invited other friends, a boy, over to join us, which wasn't what I had in mind for the night. But boy, I was in for a surprise. Sherwood turned out to be just our delivery guy for the night. He wasn't joining us, in other words. When he got to the apartment, there was this awkward air about him too. He was obviously nervous, fumbling a bit with the pizza boxes, and not quite making eye contact too. My friend introduced us quickly, and it was clear from her overly thankful demeanor that Sherwood did a lot more for her than just fetch dinner. Well, after handing us the pizza, there was this brief moment of forced small talk. My friend was super nice to him despite his awkwardness. He wasn't the best conversationalist and seemed really out of place. Then Sherwood asked for my number, and I was in a tough spot because our mutual friend was sitting right there, so I just gave it to him. Yeah, we chatted for maybe 5 minutes before my friend gave him a cue to leave with something like, "Thanks so much for dropping this off." He seemed to get the hint, and we both gave him a hug before my friend said something like "drive safe," giving him another kind of cue to leave. When I asked my friend what that was all about, she basically explained that Sherwood was her unpaid personal assistant. He did her grocery shopping, he dropped off pizza, and he did all this other stuff too. I think that Sherwood was just a really lonely guy desperate for interaction, especially female interaction. My friend and I were both young and immature back then. We were about 23, but I think we both knew something was seriously wrong with Sherwood right from the get-go. It was a little hard to articulate though, because we couldn't really point out exactly what his problem was. In any case, Sherwood started a group chat with my friend and me. He just sent a meme or two every other week, and it felt like he was trying to just stay relevant without being intrusive. Maybe he was used to being sidelined or even blocked by other girls in the past, who knows. But it felt like he was trying to make me remember him, but also carefully trying not to give me a reason to block him too. I cannot speak on his behalf, obviously, but that's just what it felt like. Sherwood also offered to help with errands, and this first time I said, "Thanks for asking, but no." He asked every weekend after that, and one day, unfortunately, I made the mistake of accepting his help. I knew better, but I had recently found a great deal for a new washing machine on Craigslist, but truthfully, I had no idea how to pick it up or install it. When I mentioned it in the chat, Sherwood excitedly volunteered to take care of the whole thing. He handled the whole pickup and installation like a total champ, which saved me so much hassle. I tried to pay him for his efforts because I wanted to show appreciation, but he wouldn't accept any money. I insisted even, but eventually he suggested that I could repay him by joining him for a hike. And that was really weird. I was uneasy about this. It felt a bit too personal and almost like it could be mistaken for a date. But Sherwood framed it as nothing more than a friendly outing, like a transaction to balance out the favor. So in the end, I agreed to the hike. I rationalized it by telling myself that it was a fair trade for installing the washing machine and that it was genuinely a form of payment, especially since I didn't think that he had too many friends. This hike felt like maybe a way for him to have some companionship, I guess. I thought that it might be nice helping him. Part of me was still uneasy, I won't lie, about spending time with him in such an isolated setting, but like I said, I convinced myself. So, the day of the hike, Sherwood picked this trail that was nearby. I had been there before, and honestly, it was gorgeous. As we walked along together, he chatted about ordinary things like work, the weather, and his hobbies. Everything seemed, well, normal. until he suggested we go off the main path to see something special that he wanted to share. Like, what could that even mean? Well, we reached this secluded spot, and there, right there, just sitting there, was a dead body. My heart pounded suddenly so violently as Sherwood stood there, so eerily calm and nonchalant. The casualness in his demeanor made me feel even more uneasy. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a dead body, but was also revealing his darker side of himself. Man, it smelled bad too, but not like in the movies. I didn't know how long it had been there. I'm not a biologist, but my guess is that it had smelled a lot worse before, but now it had gone down. At that moment, I mumbled some excuse about needing to get back quickly and started walking briskly towards the main path. I was urging Sherwood to follow me. I thought that maybe this was some twisted mind game, like a way to intimidate me or show that he wasn't just some harmless little boy. Maybe he was trying to send a message that said, "You should know I'm familiar with things like this." Or there's another possibility too. Maybe he just wanted me to think about him more or something. Sometimes when I talk to people, I feel like they only notice me for the time that we're together, and then they won't think of me again until the next time that we meet. It's possible that Sherwood felt that way with me, and maybe he thought that showing me something like this, a dead body, would make him less forgettable. Truthfully, I have no idea, but on the surface, he seemed oblivious to how inappropriate this was. As we walked back together, I was in full flight or fight mode, instinctively looking around to see if there were other hitchhikers or rangers or anyone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone. The moment that I spotted someone else on the trail, I called out. Not to expose Sherwood, but just asking for directions back to the parking area. I wanted to make sure that Sherwood and I wouldn't be left alone together. I asked this gentleman to walk us back to the parking lot. I wasn't going to take no for an answer too. I kept pretending like I was confused about his directions, and eventually he agreed to just walk us there. Getting help from that guy was my way of re-anchoring myself to safety and normality while I was still under the shock of what Sherwood had actually shown me. We got to the parking area. There I called my friend and told her that I was with Sherwood. I suggested that he could drop me off with her and that we'd be there in 20 minutes, and Sherwood agreed. That was my way of making sure that if anything happened, it was on the record that Sherwood was the last person to have been with me. Also, I immediately texted my friend about what had happened to get that on the record too. When I got to her apartment, we said thanks to Sherwood and kindly told him to go away. I had already told her through text, but then I started going into all the detail with her. The fact that the body had insects, the fact that the face was decomposing but still recognizable, etc. Her reaction was pure horror. Not just about the dead body, but also how nonchalantly Sherwood had treated the whole situation. She confessed that she always sensed that something was off about him, even though she'd never imagined anything this disturbing. We both agreed, though, that we needed to remove Sherwood from our lives. She admitted that she felt stuck and that she had become too reliant on Sherwood to just fire him cold turkey. So we planned on how we could do it. It was this gradual phasing out plan. We would limit our interactions to times when others were present. We would slowly reduce our response to his texts. I would never ask for his help again, that's for sure, and my friend would ask for less and less help too. Sherwood kept texting during weekends, offering to run errands or asking if we needed anything, to which my friend would reply, "I'm trying to work on being more independent, but you've really been such a huge help." Eventually, as my friend started dating someone new, she introduced Sherwood to her boyfriend, and after that, Sherwood never contacted her again. I had called the cops the same night of the incident, by the way, but it was a while before we heard more news about it. It was at least a full month later that a news report confirmed discovery of a dead body in that area where Sherwood had taken me hiking. They made an arrest, and it wasn't of Sherwood, but of this other guy that Sherwood followed on Instagram. I have no idea if Sherwood was connected to the murder in some way or not, but reflecting on everything, I do think that there's one clear moral of this story. always trust your instincts. I traveled to Chicago once to visit some old friends. This was around 2015. I went out on the town with my buddy Kyla. I was not one to get wasted, and I never knew her to be that type either. And that made this night, well, kind of strange, really. You see, she took me to what she called a punk bar in a neighborhood that I'd never visited. Cool, I mean, I like punk bars. But this was no punk bar, really. It was more a goth bar, mostly staffed by cross-dressing stripper types. Unexpected, but I was down for the experience. We each got a drink and found a table, and before I knew it, the night completely unraveled. We wound up getting physically threatened by a 6-foot-tall man in high heels who looked like he was demonically possessed. Something overcame me, and I almost threw a large glass object at him before Kyla intervened and tried to convince me to leave. This sort of reaction from me was, well, completely irrational and atypical. I really don't know what overcame me, except extreme anger toward this person who was yelling at us for no reason and flipping me off. But the even stranger person was this random man across the bar. He stood probably about 40 feet away on the other side, and he was just absolutely bizarre to me. I initially thought, oh, he's handsome in an unusual way. But then I saw his eyes and was horrified. They were completely black and slanted upward, and he looked at me like he hated me. For the next hour or so, Kyla and I continued to get a second drink, even though we both wanted to leave. Something anchored us there, and we sat there uncomfortably speaking to each other, not knowing why we just didn't go someplace else. Every time I looked up, this strange man with jet black eyes was glaring at me from a different part of the bar. I was overcome with strange thoughts too. I started having these weird thoughts of maybe I should go to that hallway and wait for him. And then my rational mind thought, what the heck? No, why would I do that? And this internal argument carried on for a while. I fought the urge to go into some dark corner and just wait for this weirdo to approach me. I actually wanted nothing to do with him. He was creeping me out and scaring me, but I also felt compelled to do something against my own best interests. It felt like there were intrusive thoughts getting into my brain and telling me to do something I 100% did not want to do. Finally, Kyla literally pulled me out of the bar and got us an Uber to go back to our Airbnb. And well, after that, I blacked out at that point. Apparently, though, it was a very bizarre ride where I got us lost several times. The first Uber driver dumped us off in a strange part of town, refusing to continue. The second one finally looked at our Airbnb listing on my phone and got us to the right place, which was on the other side of the city. Poor Kyla spent about $100 on these follies. This dragged on for hours, allegedly, and I don't remember a thing. And I only had 2 drinks. I had been a social drinker for years by this point. There was just no reason that 2 drinks would have done this to me. Well, the next day I woke up and needed to get back on the train to continue my travels, and I have never felt more physically awful in my entire life. I was so ill that I contemplated going to the hospital. On the L ride to the Amtrak station, we were sat across from the schizophrenic man who shouted at us the entire time about the alternate reality that he was living in. Nothing felt worse than enduring his ranting for an hour while I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I want to say, too, that there probably was something slipped into my drink, but I also cannot forget about the deranged look and behavior of that crossdresser who accosted us for no reason, and I definitely cannot get the image out of my head of that horrifying guy with the black slanted eyes who was just staring at me. It didn't hit me until years later, too, that, well, maybe I was encountering a room full of demons that night. My brother and I were driving between 2 medium-sized cities late one night a couple of weeks ago. We live in Sweden, so it was pitch black where we were, and on this stretch of the road there was nothing but forest. At this time of the night, the road is pretty empty as well. It's kind of a narrow road without a space on the sides. It has low railings along the sides, and behind them there are high fences to prevent wildlife. So suddenly, as we're driving, we see a person on the side of the railing in our headlights, 10 meters in front of the car, I would guess. My brother was driving about 80 kilometers an hour, so he didn't have a chance to make a maneuver, but we drove by the person no more than half a meter in full speed. And we were shocked. After a few seconds, we both wondered what the heck that was. It happened so fast, but we agreed that it was a young woman dressed in black who was leaning or sitting in a strange way against the railing, and behind her on the other side of the railing stood a man in all black, hugging or holding her from behind with both arms. Behind them was the high fence, as I was speaking about earlier, so how did they even get there? There were no cars nearby, and there wasn't even anywhere to stop with a car, to be honest. Well, after a minute, we decided to call the cops, and they asked us to turn around to see if they were still there. We got back, but unfortunately, they were gone. The police did arrive and started searching with headlights, and we continued driving home. My brother and I were really shaken by this, and honestly, it's still haunting me. What was the deal with these people? Did the guy hold the girl so that she wouldn't run out in front of our car or something? Did the woman try to escape from the man? The only possible way forward for them was in the forest, without lamps in the cold, far away from any houses. In retrospect, it's easy to be wise, and of course, we probably should have stopped at once, but we didn't, and I really regret that. This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal I felt, well, really out of control. So I'm sharing this as a part to gain control over my story. It's long and it's spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to listen to. So part 1. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice. Sorority-type girls, I guess you could say. Well, we decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, though, saying that she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. How were they fighting in less than a day, right? I smiled and told Sam that she just made a bad first impression and I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked and the door opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C since we were sharing a bathroom anyway. I learned that her name was Nellie. We were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking that her question was a bit odd. We were both in our 20s after all. I mean, of course I drank alcohol. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate, though. As I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her, to be honest. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and since she had an accent and a lisp, I assumed that she must have been bullied. Nellie was different from me, though. She was shy and claimed to not have hobbies or friends, but I figured that since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her, like I was doing a good deed, I guess. Part 2. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, made friends, and got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy enough because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison, and I would open my door and then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. Now one night, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed and she hurriedly put on her sandals and neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle, Nellie silently following closely behind me. Eventually I found everything that I needed, but Nellie said that she wasn't buying anything. After I paid for everything, we began to exit the store and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt and he looked in my bags, confirming that I hadn't stolen anything, as if I ever would anyway, but I didn't think much of this incident. But when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the 4th time, as my bags were being searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone or with friends. They only ever rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. Of course, I wasn't with her the whole time, but she was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to even think anything contrary. Part 3. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only other person with a bathroom key and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business, but that didn't explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom. I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again though, toilet paper, hair and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper as well. I knew that I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic, so I sent a positive, non-aggressive text. I wrote, "Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please?" I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie, she never acknowledged the situation though. She still opened her door with mine, hung out with me and sat with me in class. For the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it just never seemed to help. Nellie would clog the toilet, I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it all over again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie finally. I wrote, "Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I have to report you." I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided then too that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with anyway who didn't clog my toilet, and as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall like that, but I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. It would all work itself out. Part 4. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked too. Nellie had stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December and instantly my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly sweet sort of rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet, so for about 2 weeks I just avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam and Poppy, they were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to go and smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell, when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club apparently, and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam at least. As we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everybody fell silent. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment toward Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh, I'll admit, and part of me felt bad for Nellie, but at least Christmas would be relaxing and hopefully we could all, get along a little better. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she bought me some scented candles for Christmas, funnily enough. And when I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. Part 5. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined this, and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plans, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much, really. And despite everything, I still wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things that I could talk with Nellie about, attempting to break the awkward silence a bit. So I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were like teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I just changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "I do this a lot actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin I barely put my ear against it, and I can hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and genuinely a little bit scared. Nellie started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly at that and nodded. I genuinely had no clue how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie suddenly slammed her fists on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from Sri Lanka, and I apologized, even though she definitely told me that she was from Sri Lanka. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide, and her mouth seemed to open more than usual when she said this. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said that I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and stuttered out a disingenuous maybe. Nellie leaned back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and I went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early instead, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. Part 6. So the next day, I did laundry, went shopping, and by 2 p.m. I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, though, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was terrible, But the sight was even worse. The walls, floors, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints. I closed the door, trying not to puke. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned to anger as I messaged Nellie. I said, "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it. I'm going to report you." And I pressed send. It was at this moment that I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom, but Nellie had ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report it. So I laid down to take a nap instead. 2 hours later, I was woken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for about 5 minutes. Then Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, and then called again, while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door over and over again. The shock of it made me stumble back into my bed. Then, as suddenly as it had started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door. My phone buzzed, and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. She wrote, "The cockroach screamed, 'Why do this to me? Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation,' the doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach." I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp again. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything. Nellie stood there for about an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what had just happened before going to bed, and that night, I can tell you that I barely slept. I was way too scared to close my eyes. Part 7. I awoke the next day anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Reagan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles and inspect each row as she passed. I sort of sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet me at eye level as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up in a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to snap. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things. Nellie asked where I was going, and I lied to her, saying that I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch, and as I stood in the kitchen, the door opened. "You weren't at the cafe?" Nellie's eyes darted up at me. She was looking at a knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond though. She just stared with her head tilted and mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid that she'd use the knife on me all of a sudden. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for a total of about 10 minutes before just turning around and leaving. Later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the third floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I decided to move to a different spot. But Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace. I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to get lost. I was surprised when Nellie did just that too. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie, inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I'd be smart to move out, and honestly, they were right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore. I needed to get away. Part 8. I went to Reagan's apartment as she was the closest person that I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her, and as I held back tears, my phone buzzed. Sam texted that they needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam. So I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan that I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates with distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed blood and orange liquid pooled across the floor leading beneath our table, where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in here by itself, that's for sure. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options, and I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board, and things moved quickly. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen and Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me, and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her, and I thought that moving would stop her obsession with me, but again, I was incredibly misguided. Part 9. I was happy that my new roommates were normal and no Nellie's incidences had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding Nellie-related thoughts, and I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat. I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking toward me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a card, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle, and Nellie followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nellie followed me again, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report Nellie, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nellie staring at me across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with a crowd toward campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan, past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began to walk again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie literally jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words cannot explain how terrified I was in that moment. Nellie let go immediately and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth, trying not to vomit. After a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie suddenly stood at the bottom of it. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaking. Reagan nodded and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay, you can go first," Reagan said, while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was, and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When we sat down in class, Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend, so Nellie left. I didn't pay any attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified the whole time, while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie stuff, but I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled, no matter what. Part 10. The next day, I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board, and they raised the issue to the Disciplinary Board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses, and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. The next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions with them. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything that I reported was factual, but they didn't think that Nellie had any malicious intent. So they would grant a no-contact order, but Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion, and asked them what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything. Genuinely, I was at a loss for words about this. I couldn't believe that Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I had said, and knew the witnesses' names too. The school, as far as I was concerned, had put us all in danger. Yet, they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care, that they were going to prioritize a predator over us. But with really no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie had done to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew then that that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help and she would not stop stalking me. That much was clear. Part 11. My sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidences every time that they occurred, and the school always responded by stating that they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order, and they never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates and in them, new victims, unfortunately. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie. They genuinely looked terrified too. They looked a lot like me. Having incidences happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. But I wanted revenge. A natural result of the boiling rage that I felt, I know, but now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she had imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way that she had made me suffer. I know that if I had just grown a pair at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment that I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I share here, I cannot begin to recreate the evil that just radiated off of Nellie. I still have daily night terrors. I don't go into new situations lightly. I don't speak to new people, and I don't really make any new friends. I'm also not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life ever again. But revenge, it came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of the graduates. She had failed her second year, but despite everything, and I know this is going to sound a bit weird, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Who knows though, maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. So last year, me and my ex were living in a cottage with our son and my stepson. We lived on a property where the landlords were right there basically. But we got along great though. Their son was a friend of mine and my father went to school with the landlords too. The lady had her brother living with them who is on the spectrum, but it's more like he's just awkward more than anything. Now, I've had suspicions of someone in our house because we would notice things moved around and drawers open. I would always be missing money and all of my change was gone too. That started many arguments between us because I thought that she was stealing my change and cashing it in, and it was all silver coins that I've collected for years. My ex thought that I was stealing money out of her car, and I thought that she was taking out of my car as well. Sometimes too, she would wake me up in the middle of the night, saying that she just heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs, which is the main floor. I would get up and look, and I didn't see anybody. This happened a few times. Sometimes when my ex would get home early from work too, she said that she would hear the downstairs door close, but didn't see anybody outside. I've come home from work early around noon when everybody knows that we're normally at work till 5. And one day I came home and the landlord's brother was sitting on my front steps. I said, "What's up? What you doing?" And he said, "I'm sitting, I just got the mail and was dropping it off to you." I literally grabbed the mail out of the box on my way in though, and we have separate mailboxes, so it's not like it was mixed with theirs. I told him, "Don't be creeping around up here. I don't need you on the steps in my area when I get home from work." One time, everybody was down by the pool, and I came down and yelled down to everybody that I'm having a barbecue for them. Where I was standing, I could see into the room where their step-grandfather was staying, and he's loaded. Always has a wad of cash, like 10K or more with him. When I yelled down, I heard a commotion and saw him closing drawers and running out of the room, and came outside and creep-lit a smoke. I could tell that he was shaking in his boots though, thinking that he got caught doing something. I told Grandpop that he was in there and he lost it on him. But now for the creepy part. So I've told the landlord that her brother has been snooping in my house, and now I caught him snooping in their house for money as well. We've been out of there for about a year now, and he started messaging my ex on Facebook trying to talk to her. She ignored him for a while, and He kept video calling her and she wouldn't answer and then blocked him. He found her Insta, her TikTok, and every other platform, and kept messaging her. She finally answered and asked if everything was okay, and he started confessing his love for her, saying that he wants to see her and my son. He then said, "I have your panties and leggings." He told her, "I'm on my way home from work and I'm going to put your undies on and watch some explicit material." She obviously said, "What the heck are you talking about? How do you have my underwear?" And he told her that he would sneak into the house and go through her stuff. There were times that she would call me after I went to work and would ask if I'm there because she would hear the door open as she was in the shower. He started sending screenshots of his phone, showing her that he has her as a background because of how much he loves her, and that he likes to put her leggings on and play with himself to her pictures. While living there too, the landlord's kid was telling us how he hears him playing with himself in his room and plays videos really loud and him screaming her name as he was doing his thing. We didn't really believe it at first, but now, holy cow. He was working at a farm that is also a doctor's office. He was fired because he was sneaking into the house and watching this girl that lived there sleeping. Also because he was apparently creeping on children in the playground at the doctor's, and he had no reason to be over there when his job was on the other side of the property, which means that this guy is an absolute creep. He told my ex that he has 13 articles of clothing that he took from her as well and is very proud of it. Told her that he has underwear and clothes from other women that rented the cottage as we did. He thought that this was okay and would somehow make my ex attracted to him. He started asking for her address so that he could send her stuff back to her, saying, "Why do you hate me, baby? I'm in love with you and I can do everything you like." He then said, "I've seen how he makes love to you and I could do so much better." And what the heck, right? Was he watching us? He was definitely watching us sleep. My son slept in the room with us and he was a newborn in that house, and we were there until he was 3 before we moved. My stepson had his own room, which had a door to the outside, so he would have had to have walked through his room to get into ours. My stepson was uncomfortable, saying that he hears things at night on the window and that sometimes the window would open by itself too. She is going to bring all that stuff that he texted to her and admitted doing to other people to the cops because he needs to be stopped. And so, there's my story. What do we do next though? I don't need this guy trying to creep on my ex and my son. It's all very unsettling and the whole thing has really disturbed me. When I was around 12, my friend and I saw something that I could never explain. And honestly, if someone had told me this, that they saw this, I wouldn't believe them either. But I know what I saw. So the house that I grew up in, it was on the corner of a city street. The way the house was situated, from my bedroom windows looking out, I had 2 large ones side by side. You could see the street and the entire side of the house across from us. A guy friend of mine lived on the 2nd floor of that house, and him and his family were gone for the weekend. My friend and I were in my room playing Nintendo, and I was sitting on my bed facing the windows. It was evening, but must not have been later than like 6 or 7 because my friend wouldn't have been over too late. It was her turn playing and I'm watching the screen, but something catches my eye and I look out of my window and see something in the friend who has gone for the weekend's home. It looked like what you would describe a Yeti to be. It was white, as tall as the ceiling and covered in hair. I frantically told my friend to look and she paused the game and immediately saw the same thing. We got down on the floor and crawled to my window to watch this thing. Whatever it was destroying the house, like breaking chairs, breaking dishes, ripping up the sofa, etc. I remember asking my friend if she was seeing what I was seeing and she confirmed that she was. We watched this thing for a good few minutes and then kind of started diverting our attention to other things in like a, oh my goodness, what the heck way. And when we eventually looked back, whatever it was gone. We both kind of seemed to instinctively know that this was something that should stay between us. In other words, it wasn't discussed, but the vibe was definitely still there. Now, in order to get home, she would have to walk past that house, so she had her dad pick her up that day. I tried my best to sleep, but I kept waking up and looking out to see if I saw it again, but I didn't. Now, the next day I was sitting outside of my house waiting for the friend who lived in the house to come home. I felt like I needed to be there when, well, they eventually came running out of their destroyed home so that I could try to explain what we saw the night before. They pulled up sometime in the afternoon and I hid behind my door in some kind of fear, I guess. Like, I knew that this was going to be bad sort of thing and I was scared to be a part of it, really. I watched them go inside and I wait and wait. And, well, nothing. Eventually, the friend and his dad came out to get the luggage from the car and look as nonchalant as you can be. At this, though, I am absolutely confused. I mean, the house was destroyed. We saw it happen. I go across the street to my friend and he greets me and I'm kind of like, what's up? Everything cool? And he starts talking to me about something and it hits me that the house is fine. Everything was as they left it. At this point, I'm just so confused because I know what I saw and I have a witness. Later on, the friend who witnessed this event and I talk and neither of us can understand what the heck happened. But life just kind of moved on. It wasn't until I was an adult and I read about the so-called glitches in the Matrix that I started to think that that might have been the explanation for what I saw. Some poor prehistoric creature got whirled into a house, freaked the heck out, and then glitched, returning everything to its normal state. I mean, yeah, it sounds kind of crazy, I know, but I racked my brain for decades trying to come up with something more based in reality, and I just cannot land on anything. I've only ever told two people what we saw that night, my mum and my husband. Neither outright say that I'm lying because they know me and they know that I'm not someone who tells stories like this, but they don't seem to enthusiastically believe me either, I guess. And look, I get it. They probably think that I saw something that they can logically explain, but I swear, unless you saw it, it's impossible to know just how real it was. Years ago, my ex-wife and I were visiting her grandmother for the 4th of July in an old mining town in Montana. Her grandmother lived in the home that she was born in, built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, an old brick and stone house cluttered with era-appropriate furniture, paintings, and decor. Very old and very eerie. Now, after a day of barbecuing, sightseeing, and lighting off of fireworks, myself and my ex-wife head to bed. The room that we were staying in was off of the kitchen, but was two small bedrooms connected with a hallway between, and a single door back out to the kitchen. My ex falls asleep immediately, and I laid there a while before hearing her grandmother come in and take the bedroom attached to ours. She gave up her own bedroom to my ex's parents, who were also staying. I hear the creaks of an old bed spring as she adjusted to lay down when, all of a sudden, she starts mumbling, progressively getting louder, clearer, and more violent. She starts cursing and saying something to the effect of, "Leave me the F alone, my family is here," and a whole lot of FUs. By this point, I am in complete shock as I've known her for years and had never even heard a curse word come from her mouth. She starts to say no, no over and over, and from the corner of her room across the hallway, a straight shot from her, I'm laying, I hear a very sort of labored gasping, breathing sound, like someone is halfway breathing underwater or through a machine or something. The breathing picks up faster and louder to the point of being deafening, and lasts for, well, I don't know how long. My eyes are pinned shut now, and I feel the most dreadful and discomforting feeling that I've ever felt in my life. Truly the worst feeling I've ever experienced. Even with my eyes shut too, I feel as if the room is growing darker and darker from that corner as the breathing continues. And then, just like that, it stops. Her grandmother shifts out of bed, and goes to sleep on the couch. As she's leaving, I manage to muster just enough courage to open my eyes, and from the light of the kitchen I see her leaving, and right behind her is what I can only describe as an enormous dog. It had to be 4 or 5 feet tall at the shoulders. She did have a black lab, but it never came in with her, and it wasn't in there when I laid down. And what I saw, it had to be double the size anyway. It was definitely not her dog. I've experienced some paranormal activity in my life, but that day, that is the only one that terrifies me. Tonight, my fiancé and I were able to tour a haunted asylum. After a brief history of the place given by a guide, we were permitted to walk around all 4 floors of the asylum for as long as you'd like. Everything was going great too, and I got some neat pictures of an original electrotherapy chair and things like that. In the attic floor, there's a room at the very end that's extremely large, and it was set up with a ton of candles and these sort of little memorial obituaries printed out. On the right, there's a tiny crawl space, and I wouldn't have been able to fit in it, nor would my fiancé or any regular-sized adult. I went into the room with my fiancé, and there was another smaller room off to the left side. He goes into that room to check it out, and at this point, I'm extremely interested in the obituaries, and I'm reading them out loud. In about 3 or so minutes, he comes back. I'm still reading these obituaries to him now that he's back, and that's when the air starts to feel really heavy, and the more I read, the more tense I feel. At some point, we both had our back to the crawl space, and something like a pebble is thrown from the crawl space and hits the opposite wall. I look at my fiancé and turn toward the crawl space. Another larger piece of brick flies out and hits the wall. Obviously, we are both freaked out and turn to leave the room. My fiancé is walking in front of me with his flashlight, but as soon as we get out of the room, I hear scraping followed by footsteps. I look at my fiancé and he nods, saying that he heard it too. I turn around and wait to see if someone is coming out of the room. The noise stops at the door, and I can assure you that there was no one there. Upon hearing that, we hightail it out of there and go down to the ground floor and head outside the asylum. We are both excited and freaked out at the same time that we had experienced something down there. The atmosphere was so heavy when we got outside that it felt like every muscle in my body was tensed. I took some time and we headed home after a few minutes. This wasn't the only thing that happened though. You see, when we were taking pictures of objects like chairs and such, my phone kept refusing to take the picture, stating that my subject wasn't close enough to the camera. It kept doing that autofocus thing where it finds faces, and it was just focusing on air above the chair where a face would be. That was a bit freaky, but technology is weird sometimes, so I'm not too sure about that one. Anyways, it was fun, and I'm thoroughly freaked out now because that crawl space thing was certainly not any technological error or something to that effect. This happened to my best friend and I when we were 16. It was the weekend and we live in rural Montana. We heard that the Milky Way would be brightly on display that night, so we hopped into my car and decided to go park on a back road with little light pollution with some snacks and enjoy the show. At the time, I had a 2001 Toyota Echo, and it was my pride and joy. I opened up my sunroof, and we found a nice little pullout on a gravel road that I had driven well over 100 times. We locked all the doors, put our seats back, and stared up at the beautiful starry sky as we chatted and ate our snacks. We were in a farm area. There was one little house about a mile behind us. The house was quiet and the outside light was on, but it was nearly 1 a.m. After about half an hour, we began to hear footsteps on the gravel road approaching us from the rear. It was dark, but the sky lit up the outside well enough for us to see our surroundings for a good distance. We couldn't see anything walking on the road though. Growing up on these back roads, you learn over time what different animals and humans sound like walking through the woods or on the gravel like this. I'd been on these roads my whole life and could tell that this was not an animal. It was far too noisy, and the heel would scuff the rocks as if it was a heavy pair of boots. We watched intently, but right when it sounded close, it stopped. But then we heard whistles, high-pitched, eerie whistles. At first, my friend said that it sounded like a recall whistle, like maybe someone nearby was calling their dog. But then they got short, and they were sporadic with no real pattern. At that, I closed the sunroof and we began packing up to go. I threw the blanket on the back seat, and we put away our snacks. The hairs on my neck, though, they suddenly stood up, and right when I was about to mention it, the handle of the rear door got yanked really hard, like someone tried to open the door. It snapped like it was let go hurriedly. I looked out that window the moment that it happened, and there was nothing there. There was nowhere to hide, too. My mirrors were pointed in all the right places, so I had a good view no matter what angle I looked, and we didn't hear anyone run away either. Goosebumps suddenly formed all over our arms, and I threw it into drive and sped off. The next day I returned. I wanted to look for footprints or some sort of an explanation for what happened that night, but really, there just was none. It was quiet, and the only trails in the gravel were tire tracks from the night before. I don't know what it was, but to this day we get scared when we talk about it. So I live in the beautiful state of Montana, and have for my whole life. Just like everywhere, there are some really haunted locations here. I'd love to visit them and learn the history of Native American battlefields in the Old West, and Deer Lodge State Prison is one of those locations. Built in 1871, there is so much crazy history here. I highly recommend the visit if you ever get the chance. The location has been investigated by many paranormal teams, including Zach Baggins and the Ghost Adventures crew. I didn't go to investigate ghosts, I just went to learn the history. But I encountered something anyways. I've been 3 times now, and I have encountered something every single time too. My first experience happened in the hole, and not the original hole from back in the 1800s, as that one is not open to the public, but the solitary confinement cells found beneath the eerie shower room. Throughout the whole visit, I just felt dizzy and sort of heavy, I guess. I have had many paranormal experiences and am very sensitive too, so this was not something that freaked me out, but still, the hole was the darkest presence that I'd ever felt. I placed my palm on the floor, and the entire space seeped its heavy energy into me. I thought for a moment that I would pass out, but I put my walls up, and that's when I heard screaming in my head, the voices of prisoners losing their sanity alone in the dark, I would guess. I even heard a voice say out loud, "Turn the light on." My husband, who was actually in the cell, thought that I was the one who said it, which freaked me out because it meant that he heard something too. He replied, "There is no light, honey, duh." The second experience was in one of the very small original cells at the far end of the property. These cells were not part of the cell block. They were completely concrete and super tiny. I walked in mortified at the conditions that these prisoners were forced to live in. My best friend was ahead of me, peering around the small quarters. These cells consisted of 3 sleeping cells and a shared bathroom. I stood near the door, and suddenly I felt a burning move from the top of my bra strap down diagonally towards the center of my back. At that, I ran out of there, suddenly feeling like I couldn't breathe anymore. I also had 3 distinct scratches when my friend checked, and if you're familiar with the paranormal, then you know what that indicates. That same day, we went into the women's prison side too. My husband felt super uncomfortable, like he wasn't supposed to be in there. He told me that his skin was tingling uncomfortable, like he was being shocked or something. I said, "He's with me, please leave him alone. He just wants to know your story," out loud. And after that, my husband felt fine, and was able to finish the tour comfortably. The other guy with us was so uncomfortable, though, that he left the building before I even knew what he was experiencing. I think that the women felt violated by having men in there, is my best guess. I'm very fascinated by the place, and I'll be going back for sure. Each time I experience or feel a different thing, and there are countless spirits there, and honestly, it's a really, really amazing experience. So here's the deal. I've been living with my extended family for about a month due to some issues that I won't get into, and since I've been in the basement, I've always felt as if I'm being watched. And at one point, while I was playing a game on my phone, I even felt a hand on my shoulder. I had headphones in, so I didn't hear anything, and I turned around thinking that it was my aunt or uncle, but there was no one there. That was the first thing that had me going, what the heck, and I've also seen some stuff move at the corner of my eyes, but that could be anything, so I won't just say ghosts. But what really got me scared and had me so terrified that I couldn't sleep was that I was in my room watching TV as my aunt and uncle had a small older TV. They didn't use it anymore, so I was watching Disney Plus on it, and also was watching some Family Guy. I was watching the episode where Braun got married to that girl who was dying. Anyway, all of a sudden I got this feeling of very intense fear and dread, like it was so intense that I never felt anything like this in my life. I turned off my TV and then tried to sleep, as I thought maybe some sleep would just make the feeling go away. It must have been around 2:30 in the morning. Don't judge, I have a bad sleeping habit. But then, all of a sudden, I heard one loud knock at the front door. My room is located right under the living room and front door as well. Obviously, I thought that this was a bit weird, and that intense feeling of dread and fear was still there too. Then, about 30 seconds after, I heard a knock right at the window right above me. I moved the curtain and there was nobody there, and I heard nothing. My window was shut and it was very audible, like it sort of sounded like somebody slammed their fist against it. And where the window was located, it's ground level on the side of the house, so it's possible that somebody was there, I guess. I got a feeling, though, that someone or something wanted to harm me all of a sudden. I sat up for about a minute trying to calm myself down, but I couldn't get over the feeling, and something in my gut was telling me to get the heck upstairs. I listened to my gut feeling, but as I was about to make my way upstairs, I could have sworn that I felt as if something was digging its claws into the upper left side of my back. This happened as I was leaving to go up the stairs, and I ended up staying up until 9 a.m. in the living room just watching Family Guy with the lights on. And weirdly, after that, everything was fine. I felt nothing wrong, but the occasional feeling of being watched, I guess, when trying to sleep. But I just chalked that up to being paranoid, and I wasn't too disturbed by that. This all happened about a week ago, and this brings me to about 5 hours ago. You see, I was upstairs in the living room watching some random show that my cousin was watching that I got invested in, when all of a sudden I got this weird feeling that started on my left side that felt like something was blowing air. It went through my left ear and then felt like it went into my right ear, and then there was this huge boom or loud ringing noise in my right ear. Then, I got that feeling of fear and dread again, like something was wanting to harm me. After about 5 minutes of feeling this, I heard one of the decorations for Halloween go off outside. At first, I didn't think too much of it, but then I realized it was the one that had a thing that you had to click to set it off, and you had to press it pretty hard on the button to set it off. I looked outside and saw the decoration, and didn't see anyone or hear anyone. After about another 5 minutes, it went off again. I looked outside immediately, and I didn't see anyone, but I swore that I heard something like scratching at the door. I sat on the couch and continued to sit there, and after like 10 minutes, that feeling of fear and dread, it finally went away. Something that I would like to add as well is that whenever the people that I was staying with were buying the house, the people who lived here before us, apparently just upped and left without a word, which they found weird. And another creepy thing is that they found 3 mirrors lined up in the basement, covered by a cloth. One had a crack as well that they thought was pretty creepy when they saw it. Another thing too is that I know some of these things can be normal things, but it only happens when I'm either feeling a presence or the 2 times that I got that feeling of dread and fear out of nowhere, so I find that to be a pretty strange coincidence. Also, I'm not the only one who's seeing stuff, as my family have seen stuff as well. Usually shadows or something moving at the corner of their eyes and nothing is there sort of thing when they look. Also, we have a dog who randomly barks at the front door when there's no one there and will sometimes stare over there like he's looking at someone. I've also seen some shadows, or apparitions I guess you could say, too. The first time I saw something was on my 3rd night in this house. I saw out of the corner of my eye the shoulder and the hair of someone passing by the shoulder. It was white and looked like an old dress, as it had this sort of white piece on it. I don't know the word for it, but most likely you would see this on a grandmother. They would own something similar at least, and I also saw their hair, and it was black and curly. I only saw a small bit, but it was enough for me, that's for sure. My cousin confirmed too that she had seen the same thing and was actually kind of shocked that I saw her as well. The second time I was laying in my bed facing the room, and not the wall but just sort of into the vacant space. And as I was laying and falling asleep, I saw a very clear black apparition that wasn't fully there, like I could see clearly through, but there was the outline, and they walked across the room and looked to be sort of staring at me. However, they were fully black like a shadow, and I couldn't make out any details other than the face I think was a woman. When I saw that though, I ended up getting up and heading upstairs, as I was like, I don't want to be watched while I'm sleeping. So I went on the couch and I was browsing through my phone and was scrolling on Facebook. I left the door open that goes into the living room, and that was when I saw very clearly a shadow figure peek around the corner to look at me. I looked up where I saw it, but it wasn't there anymore, and all the hairs on my arm went up. I went back on my phone, and about another 30 seconds later, I saw it quickly peek at me again and go back, and I then yelled out, "Leave me alone." After that, I wasn't bothered anymore. I've been a believer in this stuff for years now, well, kind of always have been, I guess, a bit of a skeptic, but right now I'm honestly a little bit scared, as I've never had something like this happen to me before. I'll also mention that the house that I'm staying in is 130 years old, and my other family members say that they experienced the feeling of being watched as well, but they've never mentioned what I've just said, so I don't know if there's anything more to their stories. In any case, please let me know if you know what I should do about any of this, or perhaps if I just need to go and, well, lock myself up. So when I was in my teens, my mum and Nana told me that when I was 3 or 4, I used to hide behind the sofa to talk to my friend. They assumed that I had an imaginary friend, until one day my Nana asked who my friend was. I told her apparently that my friend was called Wee Stevie. He had blonde hair like me and he wanted his lemon bonbons. My mother had a younger sibling who died when he was 8, and my mum was about 16 at the time, and 4 years later at 20 she had me. Her brother was called Stephen, my Nana was Scottish, and we lived not far from the English and Scottish border on the English side. So apart from my Nana speaking Scottish and having an accent, my accent was very much English. So it was odd for me to use a Scottish term such as we, and I couldn't have known about Stephen really. And apparently one day before my 5th birthday, I told my Nana and Mum that Wee Stevie couldn't visit anymore, and that was that. He was gone and I never spoke to him again. I do have a vague memory of sitting behind the sofa talking, but I don't remember seeing him. Well, when I got into my teens, odd things began to happen in the house. Never directed at me though. Pictures would fall from walls, and over the space of 6 weeks the living room door shook very gently until the day my Nana was hoovering in there, and the door shut on her and wouldn't open. I was actually there at the time that this happened. I was upstairs with my mum when we heard my nana shout. We all lived together in the same house Stephen also lived in. I ran downstairs with my mum and we both witnessed the door shake, with my nana shouting from the other side to stop it and to let her out. She thought that it was my mum, but I know that it wasn't. There was nobody around. During this time, whilst I never had anything happen directly to me, I started to feel like there was something bad in the house, and I also started having reoccurring nightmares about being in the house alone and trying to get out, but an invisible force would chase me, grab me by my feet, and drag me back into the living room. I'm 43 now, and occasionally I still have this nightmare. I just always felt like there was something negative attached to me while living there. As an adult, I've also experienced some strange occurrences over the years. Once when my son was a newborn, I'd put him in his cot to sleep at around 8 p.m, so it was pretty dark at this stage. I crept out the room and pulled the door to, leaving the landing light on. There was no light on in the room, but his baby monitor went on. I left the house to go to the car to get my bag at one stage, and when I looked up at the house, the bedroom light was now on. As I got closer to the house, I could hear him crying through the monitor. As I went into the room, he got tangled in the blanket, and it had covered his face and he was struggling to breathe. Well, fast forward a few years, and we moved house. Odd things used to happen, nothing really too weird, but just shadows which could be explained, or our dog staring at walls. It got more frequent if there had been an argument though in the house. And one morning, my husband and I were having a disagreement about our business. We were sat at the kitchen table facing the living room with the door open. Our little dog was fast asleep on the sofa, when out of nowhere, a giant Yankee candle that had never been lit flew off the table and hit my husband's Xbox that was sat next to the cabinet that hard that the box ended up in the kitchen doorway. Our poor dog was terrified and ran into the kitchen to be with us. We then left this house and moved, and things seemed to escalate in our new home a lot. Our dog wouldn't let you leave him alone, which was very unlike him. As soon as you walked out of the door, he would howl and was really distressed. By this point, my son was 18, and we all felt a negative presence. You felt like you were being watched all the time, and even with the heating on and being really warm, the room would suddenly have freezing spots that you could feel with your hands. The Alexa would start playing music, although this probably does happen to other people's Alexas too, so it may not be paranormal. But one morning, my son asked me to stop coming into his room at night. I asked what he meant, and he said that he'd often wake up with his door opening, and he assumed I was standing there watching him. He'd ask what I was doing, and the door would just close slowly. It is true that a couple of times I did go into my son's room to see if he was home after he started driving, but this was only a couple of times, and my son never woke up or spoke to me, that's for sure. Then, on to my husband. So ever since we've been together, he has suffered from extreme para-insomnia. In his dreams, he constantly sees a 7-foot dark figure in the corner of the room, and this has been in every house that we've lived in. It taunts him, touches him, and watches him. He then acts out his dreams and will pull me out of the bed. He's picked our dog up and tried to escape the room. He's stood above me on the bed screaming, hit me, dragged me, and it's usually always because he's trying to either fight this thing or get me away from it. He's had para-insomnia since he was 13, but only started seeing this dark figure since he's been with me. And so, that's my story. Well, a short condensed version of it anyway. I have no idea if we're both just sensitive to this stuff or if we're both just going crazy. Our current house feels nice with a good energy. We do often feel something, but it's nice and warm, I guess. My husband still dreams about this thing too, but not as often, which we're thankful for. But the reason why I'm here is to get your thoughts. What do you guys think about all of this? This happened in 2018. My parents, my husband, and I, we were driving to Indianapolis to see some family. I'd found out about my husband's 4-month emotional affair with his unstable ex, and I was really struggling and I felt extremely alone. His ex had tried to break us up, and I was afraid that she would succeed because of how manipulative she really was. I lied and told my husband that I was having a cigarette while actually I went to the bar. I ordered 2 double vodkas with a splash of orange juice, and I was really connecting to the bartender when she said that they were closing, and so she gave me another bar that was close by. I was already feeling relaxed when I got to TGI Fridays. I ordered 2 more double vodkas, and I was pretty much wasted. So I went outside to have a cigarette and to sort of wake me up a bit. I was leaning against a light pole in the parking lot. Time passed, and I suddenly realized that I was being walked and pushed into a car. Suddenly I heard my mum yelling to stop, that I was her daughter, and this creepy man was challenging her on whether we were related. It was insane, and I don't really remember too much, but I do remember him trying to steal me, if that makes sense. This guy would not give up and was basically holding me hostage. That's when my mother said that she'd call the police, and he drove away so quickly that his passenger driver was still open. My mother and husband told me later that they tracked my phone and came to where it said that I was. I had my phone in my purse, so I don't know if the guy got rid of it or what, but whatever the case, it was very scary. They found my phone discarded. Then my mum called 911 because I was extremely drunk and am not making any sense. I woke up in the hospital. I was tied down because apparently it was for my safety. And when I actually woke up, I had huge bruises on my arm from the guy trying to get me into his car, and also an incredibly huge bruise on my chest. I didn't know what happened at the time, but I felt very guilty and never really understood what actually happened. My husband and I eventually worked it out and we're good now, but I'm thankful that my mother and him were both there that night, because if they weren't, really, I don't want to think about that. This happened about 3 years ago when I was 15. At the time, I was making pocket money by mowing the lawn at my mum's condominium. The lawnmower was kept in a small storage building where only I and the landlord had keys to. Some backstory about the building. It didn't have any windows and only one door. It consisted of only one room where the lawnmower and other gardening stuff were kept. The building's inner and outer roof had a small space in between them too. I wouldn't call it an attic, but just a space really. The inside roof was made of only spare planks, which meant that you could see into the said space. Anyways, one Sunday I needed to mow the lawn, so I took the keys and headed to the storage. The door was locked as usual, so I opened it with the keys. I stepped into the storage, and with no particular reason I looked up, and my heart suddenly dropped. Up there, on those rickety planks, there was a man just looking down at me. I looked up only for a second or two, and he looked back at me. His clothes were dirty and face covered in scars. I didn't want him to do anything, so I just sort of pretended as if I didn't see him. I took the lawnmower, walked out the door, and closed it behind me. I immediately ran out to our apartment and called the police, who arrived in about 5 minutes. The police, they went in, and a couple of minutes later they brought out the man in handcuffs. The man had been trying to climb back into the roof while holding a pair of garden shears, and that was truly horrifying. Who knows what could have happened if I didn't look up while entering the storage. Me and my mum moved out sometime after this, but that is an event that I'm grateful that didn't turn into something worse. It was autumn in 2015. I was 23 years old, I'm now 31, and during that time I lived in Lancaster as I was studying at the university there. For those who are not familiar with the place, it's a small and rather quaint town in the northern part of England. As a student, you could either live at the university campus or in private accommodation in the town. I had decided to live in a newly built, renovated apartment in a nice side of the town, and yes, it was very expensive. Now, I had already been studying for 2 years and had reached my 3rd year by this stage. At this time, I had grown accustomed to the layout of the town, and I felt comfortable and safe living there, semi-independently at least, with 2 other friends who were also studying at the university. Since my 1st year, I had decided to improve my fitness by taking nightly runs around either the campus or the town. As we were living in the town centre by my 3rd year, I would run either with my housemate or sometimes alone. The important thing to note about this place, though, is that, and this will be important for later, it's quite a large residential area that is hilly and far removed from the bustling centre, which at that time was a hub for the students or the local northern folk, probably drinking in pubs or eating pies or something. Now, occasionally, like I mentioned, I would run with my housemate. However, I preferred to run alone and listen to some kind of heavy metal. I was a big fan of Deftones during that period. On this particular day, as I said, a chilly autumn evening, I had decided to run alone, and it was about 8 p.m. and I had my headphones in. I had started to run up to the more isolated district that led up to a very pretty residential area and a large green called Williamson Park. It actually had a butterfly museum at the top of the hill. And next to the park was a very large graveyard, the kind that is miles wide and had different areas, large yew trees, crumbling graves, a crypt in the center overrun with leaves and ivy. But what was especially creepy about this particular cemetery was that it had the ruin of an old mental asylum or hospital at the other side. You could actually sneak in if you walked across the width of the cemetery and crawled through a small hole in the fence that led to the asylum grounds. This was obviously not advised though, as guard dogs roamed the derelict building all the time. It was not a place that you wanted to be during the night either. So, I had made my way past Williamson Park and up to the entrance of the graveyard. Immediately, my eye was drawn to something small standing at the imposing gates of the graveyard. They were kind of tall, black iron gates that were at the bottom of a little winding path. I felt a little apprehensive, but it wasn't unusual to see people walking their dogs, etc., out of the graveyard, so I started to slow my pace to a walk in the direction of the shape. As I drew nearer, I realized that the shape was a child, maybe around 9 to 10 years old, and they were running towards me frantically. They looked panicked and scared. I think that they were crying. I vividly remember that the girl was not wearing a coat, only a thin dress that would not be suitable for the harsh autumn here. She asked me if I could help her though. She was desperate and seemed to be frightened of something. She kept looking back into the graveyard, which at this point was totally pitch black beyond the gates. I mean, there was absolutely no light beyond that path. As the graveyard was quite large, it was chilling to see the depth of the blackness and the vulnerable child standing at the mouth of the gate, helpless like this. I don't recall what the girl said exactly, but I then offered to call the local police. I dialed 999 into my phone and had it on loudspeaker, but the girl immediately changed. She was not happy about the fact that I was calling the police. That was clear. She stopped crying and seemed angry, almost demanding, and insisted that she did not need the police to help. I reassured her that it was best to inform the police, even offered to walk her to the station, which was about 20 minutes back down the hill. And this is where the story gets weird and a little bit terrifying too. You see, the girl turned and ran back into the graveyard. She ran directly through the gates and into the eerie blackness. She didn't turn back and just ran as quickly as possible until she had completely disappeared. And it was then totally silent. I was spooked beyond belief, now standing in the darkened street completely alone. I had so many questions. Like, who was that girl? Why was she alone like this, at this hour? Why was she scared of the police? Why wasn't she frightened of the dark? Who might she be running to, or maybe from? I turned and I ran all the way back down the hill, not stopping until I had reached a well-lit, built-up area. And safe to say, I didn't run on my own again at night after that. My post-secondary classes were always at night, and I usually got out at around 11:30 p.m. Home was 5 long Florida miles away, a drive that typically took around 25 minutes. At that time, my fiancé and I were living in a brand new apartment complex on the 4th floor. From day one, though, strange things started happening. Our apartment had an unusual layout, I guess. Basically, a big circle. The bathroom connected to both the living room and the kitchen, with doors on either side, and our closet was located within it. For whatever reason, too, that closet door refused to stay shut. I tried countless experiments to figure out why, but every time without fail, I'd come back half an hour later and it would always be open. Then there was our cat. He would sit in the bathtub staring at the bathroom door, letting out these low, drawn-out meows. It was unsettling, but we figured that it was just one of those weird pet things, especially because nothing else was happening at the time. Well, until it did. One night, my fiancée called in a panic. She said someone had tried to rattle the front door handle right off the door. I checked our front door camera, but there was no sign of anyone outside. While I was still on the live feed, trying to calm her down, it happened again though. A violent, almost desperate rattling, like a grown man trying to tear the door off its hinges. The door was the only point of egress or ingress in the apartment. I told her to grab the shotgun, sit in the corner, and that I was on my way. I left class instantly, hopped onto my motorcycle, and somehow made it home in 5.5 minutes, blowing through the red lights. When I parked and got into the elevator, I suddenly felt like I'd swallowed an apple whole and couldn't breathe. It was as if an invisible weight pressed down on my chest. Still though, I pushed forward, made it to the door, and signaled for her to put down the gun. I searched the entire apartment, but there was nothing. That night passed without further incident, but from that point on, everything escalated. The strange occurrences became routine. We have 2 dogs, one of which is small, older, and a white dog. And one day she was padding through the bathroom, heading toward my bedroom to crawl under the bed, her usual cozy spot. My fiancé followed her, only to find that the dog wasn't there. After a few moments of confusion, she walked back into the living room where the dog was lying on the couch, looking as relaxed as ever. Then there were the objects. We came home one day to find all of our plates. They had been moved into the silverware drawer. On another day, we found both our ottoman and chair had been rotated to face the fish tank, almost as if in a deliberate contemplation sort of way. We decided to leave them that way. The strange occurrences continued though. We'd be walking through the apartment and suddenly hit pockets of the worst smells imaginable. And just as suddenly, the scent would vanish. We'd also hear footsteps circling around the kitchen island, even though we were alone. Things got so intense that we eventually moved our bedroom into the living room, turning the actual bedroom into my fiancé's workspace. The nightmares had become relentless, and we just felt safer being in an open space like this. All in all, it was a 0 out of 10 for us, and I would not recommend. Before this, I was a devout atheist, firmly grounded in the belief that science explained everything. But after this, now, I'm more open-minded for sure. I've come to believe that there's a lot that we don't understand about what really happens in this world, and perhaps we never will. So I was like 7 or 8 years old, and my mum had just tucked me into bed. I fell asleep like I always did, but then I woke up sometime later to my mum's voice saying, "Time for bed, want me to tuck you in?" I was confused by this given that she'd already tucked me in. I don't think that I responded because I was sleepy, but then something slapped me across the face really hard. I woke up, looked around, but nothing was there. Weird. Obviously, that freaked me out, so I hid under the covers and tried to go back to sleep. I was shaking, and I had that feeling like somebody else was in the room with me, standing right behind me, even though I confirmed that nobody was there. After a minute, I got slapped again though, 2 or 3 more times. This was even more confusing given that I was under the blanket now, so what the heck could be slapping me? And why did it have my mum's voice? I was obviously very freaked out, as you can imagine. I laid there in fear for what felt like an hour, unable to sleep. Then, finally, I got the courage to get out of the bed and go to my mum's room to find out if the voice that I had heard was really hers. She was asleep, though, and when I woke her up and told her what had happened, she had no idea what I was talking about. In other words, it was not her who came into my room. She was asleep the whole time. I don't know if it was paranormal or not. Maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I definitely experienced that as a kid, but I know that I felt pretty awake after being slapped in the face like that, so I'm really not sure. If it was just the one slap that startled me awake, I would say that it was probably just a dream. But the repeated slaps after I woke up, that makes me really doubt that. The memory of this event has always stuck with me quite vividly, and the details of the story have never changed. Personally, I don't think it was sleep paralysis though, because I know what that feels like, but I really just have no idea if it was paranormal or not. I've heard some similar stories, and people are very quick to attribute experiences like that to demons, but I don't believe in that kind of thing. I'm not sure if I even believe in ghosts, in fact. All I do know is that experience scared the heck out of me, and I just don't have a convincing explanation for it. There were a lot of other weird things that happened in that house, but that experience was by far the most extreme. So, this isn't something that I personally witnessed. I was told this story by one of the men who allegedly saw it. For context, this guy had run with some questionable crowds and did what jobs he had to do to make money at times, if you get my drift. So, he has a lot of stories. I mostly consider this a tall tale, but there is still enough of it that makes me wonder, well, what if? According to him though, we call him Zed, he had been finishing up some work down in Louisiana back in the late 1990s with his buddy and had a few days to kill, namely to get some fishing and hunting in, albeit out of season. One of the guys that they had worked with gave them directions to a spot way back in the swamps and marshes, or the bayou as it's more commonly called, that they could do that without risking being caught by fish and game agents. He said one of the best things about this spot was there were, oddly enough, never any alligators there. Bit of a red flag, that one for sure. Anyways, one fine morning they set out in their boat before the sun was up, navigating their way through the swamps. From what he described, this was a section that was close to the Mississippi border, routes used by smugglers to move various products across state lines. They finally arrived at the spot after a few hours and some detours, their way of not saying that they got lost, turned off the motor on their boat, and started fishing. The trees were just thick enough to prevent you from being seen from overhead, and they were essentially in a huge inlet that was somewhat sheltered from the rest of the bayou, and had the start of solid land along 2 sides of it. By solid land, that also meant that you could walk across 10 to 15 feet of muck that could suck your boots off before you got to the solid ground. So, according to Zed, the day was progressing and fishing wasn't going great, but they still had some beer, so they weren't inclined to go anywhere. They both noted that, as the guy had said, there were no alligators. Normally, you could spot them lurking around or sunning themselves, but they were just utterly gone from that spot, as were most of the big fish, it seemed. It was at this point that they observed a herd of feral hogs emerge from the undergrowth on one side of the lagoon and make their way to the muck that was described before, and commence to start rolling and rooting around in it to their heart's content. Zed and his buddies slowly angled their boat closer, as they had sidearms with them and certainly had no issues with getting wild pork instead of fish if the opportunity was there. The hogs were leery but not afraid, keeping the humans in their line of sight as they frolicked. Zed saw that they had no real way to get to a hog if they shot it there, so They just sort of floated along and watched for a good opportunity. But instead, they saw something else entirely. According to Zed, that's when they saw the mud start to move. He knew instantly that it wasn't an alligator, as an alligator would be flailing around in the mud trying to reach the hogs, and whatever this thing was, it was covered in the mud. Now, the only way that he could describe it was something was pushing its way through the muck, like a mostly submerged bulldozer, creeping up on the pigs. They watched as it slowly approached a cluster of hogs who had noticed the movement, but seemed more curious about what it was than afraid. One of them, a pig that Zed esteemed was between 150 to 175 pounds, was the furthest out in the muck and made the mistake of attempting to sniff at whatever the intruder was. Zed said that, quicker than they could react, something lunged out from the muck and was suddenly attached to the pig's head and face. As the pig thrashed and tried to jump back, letting out the most blood-curdling scream that they'd ever heard, the thing was hauled partially out of the muck and came into better view. Zed realized quickly that it seemed to be an alligator snapping turtle of proportions that he had never ever heard of. I mean, he's seen the one that they keep at the Bass Pro Shop that got big enough that it cracked the tank and had to get a new one, and he said that it was like comparing a chihuahua to a pit bull. It was still partially obscured by the muck that was covering it, but Zed swore that its shell had to be at least the size of the hood from a Volkswagen Beetle. He was an extreme car enthusiast, so he knew his vehicles. His best guess on its weight was it was well over 500 pounds, and was now backing up into the deeper water, dragging the pig with it. Zed said, from what they could see, the turtle's head was so big that it was able to fit its jaw partially around the pig's skull, and its beak was now essentially acting as a meat hook. Apparently, it was about a 30-second fight to drag the pig out of the lagoon, but Zed said that it was clear that the pig just never had a chance. The turtle dragged it out into the water, and the pig made one last desperate attempt to break free. Apparently, too, hearing something scream underwater one last time is as unnerving as you'd imagine, and Hollywood really doesn't get the sound right. It then just went absolutely quiet after that. According to Zed, he and his buddy sat there for a minute processing what they had just seen, and except for the froth on top of the water and stirred up mud, there was no sign anything had just happened. The other hogs had obviously fled as soon as their comrade was attacked, and except for some bugs, it was almost completely silent. They couldn't say why, but Zed said that they booked it out of there at that point, that something was off and it just felt wrong to be there. And I mean, it wasn't like they could go to Fish and Game and describe what they saw, but they did fill in their acquaintance on why there were no alligators in that area. As far as Zed knew, nobody else had ever seen this colossal turtle before and came forward to talk about it at least. But Zed said that it was big enough that if it caught a person unawares, it could easily overpower and kill a human the same way that it did that pig. Or perhaps if you had a body, this would be a great place to get rid of it. Again, this is how the story was told to me. It's not my story, and I'm inclined to mostly believe that it's a tall tale, or an exaggerated one at least. But it does highlight that you don't need something as fanciful as a skunk ape or a Bigfoot to be nervous about what might be lurking just out of sight. I'll start this off by saying that I grew up completely, 100% adamant that the paranormal isn't real. It can all be rationalized, and that people who believe in it haven't thought about it hard enough. I've shared other stories about paranormal events that have happened in my life recently that have completely changed my mind, primarily about my neighbor's house. That's not what I'll be talking about today, though. I live in the Midwest. I live in a small rural lot between a cornfield and a small forest in a camper. I've lived in this county my entire life, I know the entire county like the back of my hand, I guess you could say. This being said, I've come to the conclusion that my experiences around the rural and wooded parts of this county, that there are crawlers. I'm 100% sure of it, in fact. I've had many encounters, actually. Never back to back, but they happen frequently. There's a forest or a park in the middle of town that I always hated at night since I was little. As I got older, my cousin and I thought getting scared was really fun. We would go there at night on purpose, but we never lasted long. I always felt like I was being watched. This, on top of urban legends of people going missing here at night, made me feel really uneasy. Fast forward to a few years ago, though. I got married and am settling into life as a husband. I take my large all-black German Shepherd, Fenrir, on walks with me at night. I always walk towards the park, but I usually don't enter into it. The first time something weird happened was 5 years ago. I was walking Fenrir and the woods to the front and to the right of me. To the left and behind me was a neighborhood edge and a sort of small playground, when suddenly it just went silent. My dog started acting super anxious. He's usually a very stoic and quiet dog, though. He's 120 pounds and built like a tank. Looks very intimidating, and he knows it too. I heard rustling in the woods following me, though, and I felt like I was being stalked by something. At that, I ran home, and really that was the end of the first encounter. Nothing much to it. I had a few more encounters like that, but last year, things really amped up. I was on a walk around 11:30 p.m. with Fenrir, my wife, and our little newer dog, Booger. He's a terrier chi mix, and we are walking down the same path, and about 3 blocks away from the woods, 4 or so deer are sprinting out of the trees and into the street towards us, and for whatever reason they seem terrified. But then I hear what I can only describe as what sounded like a human trying to mimic the sounds of a monkey. Honestly, too, I thought that it was silly until, well, recently when I read a story about another guy who heard the same thing. We laughed it off as some kids playing around. Once we get up to the woods and are walking parallel with it, we can clearly see 2 reflective eyes and a silhouette staring us down from the tree line. We also heard a deep growl at this point, and then like a hissing sound, but it wasn't super high-pitched or anything. Both of our dogs acknowledged this as well. Finn stared and Booger growled a bit. I made a Facebook post on the community Facebook group, and other people told me similar stories from around this town. It was around this point too that I got a job as a tour guide or a maintenance guy for Rail Explorers. I'm working there again this year as well, and we start April 1st. Basically though, they take unused or tour-specific railroad sections that aren't used federally, and they have these sort of pedal carts with motor assist on them that you can use to explore the tracks. It's really cool and really fun, and the one that I work at is like 5 minutes from where I live, and it goes through the woods in an inaccessible part of the county, unless you float down the river and hike up steep loose dirt hills, that is. You go under one old car bridge, and then you go over 2 multi-100-foot length old train bridges. The first one is larger and taller, and it's about 150 feet off the ground above the forest. But the second one, that one goes over the river. Now, about 6 months into the job, and it's fall at this point, we work until midnight sometimes, with the last tour leaving at around 9 p.m. And that means that the last tour for the last 2 months of the year, they are made in complete darkness. The way that the job operates is with 6 employees. 4 get on the lead bike, and 2 get on the rear bike. From the lead bike, we drop off 1 person at the busy intersection so they can flag traffic, and 1 person gets dropped off at the large train bridge that goes over the woods. The person at the bridge gives a short safety speech to the customers, who stop and go one at a time over the bridge. The employee carts, they're much faster than the customer ones. We all have walkie-talkies, and we usually have these battery-powered floodlights on stands that we use so the customers can see us. We also have light-up safety vests as well. Now, one particular night, we were behind by 20 or so minutes, I think. Instead of leaving the depot at sunset, we were leaving at dusk at this point. I was stationed at the high bridge, and by the time that we reached the bridge, it was pitch black, aside from the stars providing a little bit of light. My co-workers, they dropped me off and waited with me until the first customer arrived. I gave the little speech to that first cart of 4, I chatted with them a little bit. I was basically trying to buy some time and wait for the next customer cart, so there wasn't a massive gap for my co-workers who have to flip the bikes around. And after a few minutes, I let these customers leave and I was alone. I must have been alone for 20 minutes, I would say. I used the radio so many times, but it was pretty much static for everybody for whatever reason that night. One of the only times we've ever had any issues like that as well. But I kept seeing, movement in the tree line. I kept hearing fast footsteps all around me in every direction. I had the floodlight on above my head, so everyone and everything could see me, but I couldn't see anything outside of it. I turned the floodlight off and used my personal flashlight, and I could have sworn that I kept seeing quick glimpses of pale skin moving quickly. But right when I started seeing stuff, I could hear the next customer car coming close, so I turned the light back on and I waited for them to come around the corner. When they pulled up, I noticed that they had a little boy with them, and he's scared of the dark apparently. I'm terrified at this point, mind you, but have to act appropriately, even more so because of this boy. I really don't want to scare him. As I'm finishing my speech though, I hear movement right behind me. I spin around with my flashlight on instinct. The poor kid, I must have frightened him too. I told them that it was probably just a deer and that they are good to go across the bridge. That same night, the person stationed at the intersection, this isn't like an in-town intersection, it's very rural. It's right next to a massive cornfield. He's Native American and was very in tune with this culture. And he told me privately a few weeks later that he heard rustling in the cornfield, and whatever was out there was apparently whispering his name and trying to get him to come into the field. He was also without communication for about those 20 minutes, but he wasn't in the woods and he could see a lot better than me. Another time, me and that same co-worker were headed back to the front cart. We were a ways ahead, so we stopped the cart in the middle of the high bridge. It sounds scary. I am a bit afraid of heights, and this bridge has massive gaps between the planks that you could definitely slip through, but after doing it so often, I guess you just get used to it. In any case, it was a clear night that night, and we were watching the stars and just small talking. But then, it goes really silent. We're about 100 or so feet in the air above the woods, mind you. We can hear for miles as well. The dogs barking across the river 2 miles can be heard without even seeing the houses. But then, we hear what sounds like a human mimicking a monkey noise again, and we hear growling. He looks at me completely seriously and tells me in a stern tone that we need to get out of here right now. I drive the heck out of there, no questions asked, and he moves states to Nevada shortly after this as well. A few other things happened here and there and to co-workers as well. Each of my co-workers have at least one story to tell. I'm only sharing mine at this point because otherwise this would be way too long. But a few months go by and it's late fall, around the middle of November. I drive through that park in town a lot when I just want to go for a drive, and I had my dog again, Fenrir, with me, and it's around 2 a.m. I can't sleep, so I'm listening to Melvin's CD and driving leisurely through the park. As soon as I get past the entrance gates, though, I feel really uneasy and just sort of weird all of a sudden. Mind you, I'm not easily scared by much, but going to that park at night, it makes me feel a primal fear. It's beyond fight or flight. I've never felt that way in my life anywhere else, in fact, ever, and I feel it every time that I'm there. So I'm driving through the park, and I've rolled the windows up a lot more. Fenrir can still poke his head out, but can't leap out. As I go deeper into the woods, I feel just worse and worse. I decide not to turn around because I'm already past the halfway point anyway. Turning around at this point would actually make me stay in the woods longer. I started speeding where there weren't turns that I couldn't see around. I round the last corner, and what I saw, it will forever stay with me. There was a pale, skinny humanoid, tall and lanky and not quite human, crawling on its hands and feet, but it was crawling so quickly that it must have been going 20 miles per hour at least. We don't have bears here. The only animal that size are large humans and deer, and I can assure you that that was no deer. It went from my right, across the street, and then just went into the tree line. Fenrir saw it too, and he doesn't bark at animals, not even other dogs, but at this thing, whatever it was, he went absolutely ballistic. He was going crazy. In fact, he was trying to force himself out of the small gap in the window, nearly foaming at the mouth and snarling. He never acts like that, ever. I'm a certified dog trainer, and I've raised him from birth, and I've never seen him like this before. In any case, I quickly got out of there, and we didn't look back. Most recently, I've sort of become, I don't know, maybe obsessed with this park, I guess is the way to say it. I've walked there at night from my camper to the park with Fenrir, and I'll never do it again. I didn't see a figure this time, but as I was entering the park, a massive owl flew by my head, so close that I could have smacked it mid-flight. This made me feel a bit weird for some reason, and as soon as I get into the park, I feel extremely weird again, anxious and nauseous. I walk a few hundred yards to the only streetlight in the entire park, and I turn around and face the woods. Me and Fenrir stand there frozen for like 10 minutes, because the silence was, again, absolutely deafening. Anytime I heard anything, I was jumpy. Finn was anxious as heck too. He kept staring into a certain spot in the woods a ways off as well. And I swear that I saw eyes in there every once in a while too. I built up the courage to walk out, and after that, I haven't gone back since. It will be interesting to see what happens at my job this year. I wanted to add that the county that I live in is packed full of abandoned mines as well, hundreds of them, and I'm not 100% sure if it's all related or not, but based on some of the things that I'm reading, apparently there might be some sort of a connection. For a little bit of background, I'm a 24-year-old female who loves scary stories, horror movies, true crime, etc. It takes a fair bit to scare me, though I haven't actually experienced many terrifying or life-threatening events, fortunately. This was during the middle of August in northern Texas, summer of 2023. The nighttime temperatures were around 100 degrees at this point. So my dad and one of my brothers, who's 11, drove an hour north into the countryside to go stargazing for my brother's Scout Merit badge. There are some twisty gravel roads in the forest as you approach Black Creek Lake, and we got to see a coyote, a deer, and even some raccoons. We live in the city, so we don't often see such animals, and we honestly thought that that would be our excitement for the night. We then finally made it to the recreational park grounds beside the lake. The layout is pretty simple there. If you're standing in the round parking lot, then the campgrounds are to the north and west, the lake is south, and the path in and out is east of us. But there are no official campgrounds east of this recreational area, which is important for later. So, we got there at around 10 PM and we set up. We were able to successfully see some stars through my telescope as well as Saturn, which was exciting for us. Throughout this whole time though, there are two parties, or what might have been one group in a parking lot and surrounding nearby area. One party was kayaking and then later fishing from the boat ramp area west of us. To the north, in the lot, there were two cars as well. And from that direction, we were constantly hearing a loud and sort of irritating voice of a woman who was obviously in a bad mood and didn't want to be there. She continuously cursed at someone, or no one in particular, and at one point was mad at someone for taking her keys and obstructing her from driving, which obviously made it sound like she was drunk or under some other influence. At one point in the night, around 11 p.m., we hear someone loudly, sporadically honk one of the car horns over and over in sort of random patterns. Then we hear the obnoxious woman rudely tell someone to wake up over and over again, then proceeding to hold down the horn for a few seconds at a time, and continuing her assault on the horn and our ears. By this point, my family and I are just about ready to leave due to this loud commotion. I personally was fixing to go over there myself and tell her off, but I knew that probably wasn't the best idea. I definitely didn't want to put myself and my unborn baby in any danger. Then, for maybe about 20 or 30 minutes, we were able to watch the stars in relative peace with little noise coming from the other two parties. Fortunately, none of these people were directly involved with what happened next, but it may have been the cause of it. So just before midnight, we packed up our stargazing stuff and we got in the car. Now, the gravel path to the exit is up a sort of slight hill or slope, meaning from the parking lot, you really can't see past where the path goes up and around a couple of trees. We drive up the hill, and just as the headlights come back down to illuminate the path in front of us, and the trees to our right side, it was right then and there that we see a man wearing only black shorts and no shirt. The timing was honestly straight out of a horror movie, to just suddenly see someone out of nowhere like that. He must have been in his late 20s or maybe early 30s, and had short dark hair. Just as the light hit him though, he was standing and walking right there, just to the right of our car in front of us at a very close distance, only a couple of feet away I would guess. But the guy, he had been walking towards our direction, and upon seeing us quickly raised both of his arms to flip us off with both hands. He keeps his hands and arms raised and is quickly and loudly saying something to us with anger or something in his voice. We couldn't understand what he was saying though, since we had the radio on and all of this happened so quickly. The second the man saw us though, he started walking toward our car quickly. My dad was driving slowly initially to avoid the agitated man, thinking that he might need help. My dad, in a sort of confused voice, says, "What is he doing?" But I just reply with, "No, go, go, go," and we sped off. I knew that this was not a situation where we needed to stick around and ask questions. It freaked me out a little bit imagining what would have happened too, if the guy had reached the car a few seconds later, if we hadn't have sped off like that. I'm not very familiar with my dad's car, and it scares me that I might have ended up pressing the wrong button to lock the door or whatever, and the guy could have opened it and done who knows what. We left and we never had anything else happen, but we did wonder who that guy was and also where he came from. The direction that he was walking from had no official campgrounds, only the forest. Maybe he lived in one of the scattered houses in the woods that we'd passed by on our long journey there. I wondered why he had been walking in our direction, toward the recreational area. My best theory is that he wanted to confront the group that had been honking the horn and waking up the entire forest, but upon seeing our car leave, maybe he thought that it had been us making the racket. Even if that's not it, or the man needed help, which is not likely considering his reaction to us, I couldn't help but feel an immediate sense of danger upon seeing him. I really hope that no harm came to those two other parties that night, but honestly, he was sort of heading in that direction, and it wouldn't surprise me if there was some sort of a confrontation, or, who knows, maybe worse. This is a story that pops back up into my mind from time to time. I've only ever told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments that I've ever had as a kid, and something that I just cannot forget. So back when I was around 10 years old, my mum finally decided that it was time for her to start taking a driver's license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. And for that reason, my dad decided that he wanted to do some practice with her besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure that she would pass the upcoming test first try. My little brother and I, we were attending swimming lessons at this nearby university at the time. Behind a forested area near the university lays this huge student parking area surrounded by trees, which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad, he saw the opportunity to take my mum here to drive around for a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them since we were too young to stay home alone. We also brought a football with us. Now, when we arrived to the parking lot later on in the evening, my parents began their practice. My little brother and I, we quickly got pretty bored though and asked if we could go over to this little grass field on the side of the parking lot just to play some football. My parents, they let us since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us whilst driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around in the other end of the parking lot. They weren't far, mind you, maybe 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I, max. But suddenly, this white Toyota pulls up into the parking lot. We were playing almost right at the exit or entrance, I guess you could say. The car turns around and it stops on my right side with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down his windows and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, I guess, was good looking and young. I guess would be around 30. But this is where things started to get a bit weird. You see, in the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could see was long blonde hair, and on the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he's from the police and that we apparently have to get into the car immediately as he has to talk with us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck my arm in front of his chest as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us once again to get into the car or else he'd have to come out and get us. My brother and I, we just sort of froze out of fear. Suddenly though, the woman put down the newspaper, showed her face and told us in the most calm motherly voice to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who honestly wouldn't hurt a fly. At this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could toward us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have time to drive to us since the road down the parking lot, it was sort of twisted all the way. When my dad heard my scream, he started yelling as loud as he could, "Hey, who the heck are you? Get away from my children." As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized my brother and I weren't alone, he threw that car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who just soiled himself when he saw my dad. My dad was absolutely furious though, and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat up the guy himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never did find out who those people were, but this episode, I guess you could call it, taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you or the ones you love. I'm really not sure what these people would have done to us, but I'm sure about one thing. They definitely were not the police. So, before I start this post, I'll say that I was very young, but my mother recalls the experience quite clearly herself. I'm not really into cryptozoology at all, but I am curious if this is a common sighting, or what exactly my mother, father, and I experienced. This was along Route 66 going from Texas into New Mexico. We were heading to my great-grandfather's funeral back in 2005, in the middle of the summer, and I was 10 at the time. The sun was starting to set, and I remember us talking. I'm eating a Happy Meal that they bought me at the time, and we were just swapping stories and having a good time. They made me this little cubby-like area in the trunk for me to lay down in, color, etc. But most of the trip was spent just looking out the window, watching things pass by. While my parents were talking and the radio was on, I was just watching the world pass by, but I remember very clearly seeing a man standing and staring at cars. He wore a black trench coat, bowler or perhaps top hat, a black beard, but the part that I remember the most vividly was bright glowing red eyes. I pointed it out to my mum, who was distracted at the time, having not seen it. And well, a couple of hours go by and I'm still looking out my window. I made a little game for myself to see if I could count how many birds I could spot along the way, and the sun was starting to set as well. And the next thing I know, I see the same dude just ahead of us. But now, because of the dark, the eyes were a lot more intense. My mum got a little bit concerned about it and told my dad to speed up. Eventually, fatigue set in and we found a rest stop. It was pitch black there, like the kind of dark that you can't even see your own feet in without a light, and we were all just trying to sleep at this point. I had to go to the bathroom and my dad walked out with me as I was rather freaked out by the sighting earlier, worried that the guy would come and grab me. As we got out of the car, I remember my father staring off into the distance and told me to hurry up, though keeping his usual calm demeanor. When I finished and got back into the car, he started it for some reason and we took off again, driving to stay in a motel instead. I asked him and my mother about it recently, as we were just reminiscing together about trips that we'd taken. And when I asked my dad why he had us go to a motel, he claimed that it was because he saw the same pair of eyes staring at us from a hill near where we were, above a sort of rocky outcrop. I never saw those, so I can't confirm either way, but my dad is certainly not one to make up stories like this. So, does anyone have any idea or stories as to what exactly this could have been? I remember the eyes so vividly, it's burned into my mind, as well as him being out in the desert heat with a heavy trench coat, and, well, I'm not sure. My dad swears that it was the devil. My mum thinks that it was a chupacabra of some sorts. I myself am not really sure what it was. Any thoughts would be appreciated. As I said, this was over 19 years ago, and I haven't seen anything since then, as I live far away from Route 66 now, and to be honest, I have no plans of going back there. For the longest time, I have really doubted sharing this, but I just need to know if anyone can help me figure out what any of this means. So when I was 11, we moved into a new house. It was our first day there, and I was busy scrapping off the old wallpaper in my soon-to-be bedroom. My parents, they went to go to the grocery store, but I stayed alone in the house so that I could finish scrapping everything off. After a while, I took a break and was looking out of the window at some point. My back was turned to the door, so I couldn't see it. Then I heard the sound of a door falling shut, and so I turned around to look. And what I saw next was someone standing in my room. Someone who looked exactly like me, but almost as if it was an older version of me, in a long white dress. There was a bright light all around her, almost like an aura. The best that I could describe it is angelic. And then she said, "Do not be afraid." But of course I panicked, and I honestly contemplated just jumping out of the window because I was so scared and had no idea who she was. So while I was turned, my back to her, and was looking out of the window again, I then heard the same sound of the door closing again. I turned around and she was gone. Not too long after that, the doorbell rang and there were my aunt and uncle and cousin who were coming to view the house. I told my cousin what had happened, and for the longest time I honestly thought that I had dreamt it, until years later when my cousin brought it up. So I know for a fact that I didn't make it up because I must have told him about it right after it happened. Is there anyone who knows what this could have possibly meant, or what it could have been? I've had a weird one that's been stuck with me for a while, and I really don't know how to make sense of it. And I have honestly accepted that maybe I'm just not going to be able to figure this one out. So, it was a normal day at home on my day off. I had just bought my house like 3 months ago, I would say, and was still getting used to it. I sat down on my sectional in the living room watching some TV. I had just made some clam chowder, literally my favorite, and set it in front of me while I put on South Park, since it's my comfort show and this was probably around noon. It was still bright out and the house was lit up through the blinds. But this is where I get goosebumps, because I cannot for the life of me remember what happened next. It was just 7:42 p.m. It was like a snap of someone's fingers and the world moved on without me. South Park was still on, definitely not near the episode I started on, which was the episode about Yelpers, and my food was still untouched where I left it. I just wasn't sitting up anymore. I was lying on the couch in front of my fireplace. But I never lay there. I usually use it to sit and tie my shoes before I head out. I can't really explain the feeling, but I'd say that there was an immense, raw sense of fear that came over me because I couldn't figure out where the time went or what had happened. There were just no pieces to put together. Besides that, too, I just felt kind of sick and out of body, which I kind of attributed to how worked up I got. It never happened to me before, hasn't happened to me since then. No history of anything like that in the family, and so I truly am at a loss for that one. To make myself feel better, I reheated the clam chowder and I ate it though. But some answers to things that have been asked of me before. Yes, I installed a carbon monoxide detector shortly after I bought the house, and it wasn't that. When I woke up, besides the general feeling I had, there were some marks on my foot, like it was tied up in a wire thread, but the marks didn't last until the next day, and then they were gone. There's no history of any epilepsy or blackouts in the family or personally. After this, though, I experienced shivers in my spine, is the best way to say it. Not painful, but at random times it just felt like the center of my spine would get cold, and it would shoot up and down the length of my back and give my whole body goosebumps. This still happens to me now and then, but nowhere near as often as when this happened. I also had some missed calls and texts, but I didn't text or call anyone while I was, well, whatever happened. Missing, I guess. That couch is super uncomfortable too. I hate it, and it's just really there to put things on. I have an awesome sectional that I can't get enough of, so I have no idea why I'd randomly wake up on the couch like that. I would never do it to begin with. I wouldn't even let a puppy sleep on it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I have no idea what happened, and it really freaks me out. It was 2009-ish. I was living on the road for 2 years at this point, hitchhiking and riding trains. I was a dumb 18 to 19-year-old. I had been all over the country, West Coast multiple times, Southwest, and decided to see the East Coast at this point. Went to Florida, and went to a small festival there too. It's called a rainbow gathering. They're kind of like the big meetups of traveler kids, old hippies, tramps, these kinds of people. They're always in state parks or national parks. Rangers will patrol it, and police sometimes show up, but for some reason it's allowed. Anyway, I'm not sure how, but these have been going on since the 70s, I think. Some people who show up are pretty hardcore train hopper gutter punk types. and some are super chill Christians who will wash your feet, literally. It's a very unusual festival, I guess. There are smaller regional gatherings and a big national gathering where thousands of people show up. Kind of the poor man's Burning Man, I guess. Huge fire pits get dug out, elaborate latrines, hundreds of drum circles. Free food is constantly made from kitchens, which are just camps devoted to making food for all of us bums. And well, I met some friends at a smaller regional one in Florida, and we parted ways never thinking that I was going to see them again. One was named Anna, and we sort of hit it off a bit. I hitchhiked north all the way upstate to New York. When I caught wind of the national gathering, which was going to be in Pennsylvania, I figured that I might as well go. I got to this gathering early, in the Allegheny National Park, and helped set up, trying to meet people, kind of looking for my group, I guess. Not sure where I was going to be camping. One day, though, I ran into Anna, who I had met in Florida. Me and her had some spiritual conversations in Florida, talking about fairies and UFOs and whatnot, and she had some unusual stuff happen to her when she was a kid. So, she and her buddy had just gotten to Pennsylvania, and we decided the three of us were going to team up. We noticed a ton of people showing up to this thing. It was getting really crowded, so we decided to move camp to a more remote area. We chose a spot off the main trail, which goes from the parking lot to the gathering. It's a couple of miles long, and there's a lot of foot traffic going up and down there, people going in and out of the festival, but we had some space. Now, this happened around dusk. Me and Anna, we were sitting by our little twig fire, stone cold sober. Alcohol isn't really allowed at a gathering like this. It does still get in, but there's a camp at the parking lot called A Camp where all the drinkers stay. There is, of course, other drugs at these festivals, but me and Anna and her friend just weren't into the whole drum circle scene. We had just gotten done having a deep talk about spirituality when we started to feel hungry and stood up to start heading down to the main circle, which is where everyone can get one big meal a day. We're standing up when Anna says, "Hey, do you hear that?" And I said, "No," and just kept putting out the fire with my foot. And she was like, "No, hey, shh, listen." So I stopped and I could hear the sound of someone walking through the forest. The thing that was weird about it, though, was that it was coming from a direction where there was no festival. So the festival was down below us about, I don't know, maybe a half mile if we were looking down the trail. And this sound was coming from our left, where it's just hundreds of miles of Pennsylvania woods. The parking lot is way up the trail, a few miles behind us. And it was odd because it sounded like a person speed walking toward us. I didn't think deer because they wouldn't be coming up to a fire pit. I genuinely thought it was just some lost hippie, I guess. As this sound was getting closer, there were some people walking down the trail and some walking up the trail. There's a sort of weird custom called Nick at Night. If you yell Nick at Night, a dude with a tin can full of tobacco will find you and roll you a cigarette. There's about 10 of them sort of just walking around, and their sole job is to maintain everyone's nicotine habit. They get a ton of donations from A Camp. So anyways, these two groups run into a Nick at Night kid, and now are all sort of standing together on the main trail talking about 10 meters below us, oblivious to us. So while that's happening to our right and below us, the sound of someone walking from our left has gotten so close now that really we should be seeing who or what it was, and there just wasn't anything there. I was sort of frozen, I guess, kind of stuck in a state of confusion, and I think Anna was too. No fear, just why aren't we seeing this person? We could visibly see leaves and dirt being kicked up too, like there was an invisible person power walking by. Whatever it was, it went right up to that group of people in the main trail and didn't stop, but it slowed down like it was checking them out. They seemed to be totally oblivious to this. They were all smoking, talking and laughing, I guess. But it kind of did a turn as it went up to them and then suddenly did a straight line towards me and Anna. Anna had a keychain with 1 million things on it, and she was frantically looking for this mini flashlight that she had on it. It was dusk, so not bright out, but still light enough that we could see the footfalls and the debris being kicked up. My mind was thinking that it must be a squirrel or a field mouse hopping on the forest floor or something. The forest floor was covered in dead leaves, but these steps were quick, as if this was a child or a small person walking fast. It's hard to explain this, and I hope you get the drift, but this thing, it came right up to us. I am standing to the right of our smouldering fire, and Anna to the left. I could hear her just struggling with this keychain. It came right up to me, probably 5 or 6 feet away. There was nothing there though, but it did the same thing with the group. It slowed its pace like it was checking us out, like a slow trot. And as it went by, Anna said, "Hey," and shone the light where it was. There was nothing to see, and whatever this thing was, it instantly took off up the hill. Just absolutely took off. It was incredibly fast. The footfalls became like a machine gun. If I had wanted to run after it, there's no way I could have. But a second later, me and Anna took off running the opposite direction, past that group, and just kept going until we were at the bottom. A funny thing happened too. There's people at these gatherings who spend the whole month naked. They'll roll around in the mud and just look like mud people for the whole festival. One of these people we had seen around was a 7-foot giant of a man, probably 400 pounds, naked, covered in mud and leaves. Me and Anna are in full flight mode, and at this point, it's dark and we run right into this guy. It absolutely terrified us initially. Anna screamed, and then we all started laughing, and I guess that sort of cancelled out the panic. We went to go and find our other friend, and it was weird because Anna was still pretty scared, and she kept saying that it was because of her. Like, she had a weird fairy or alien situation happen to her as a kid with her mum, and she felt like whatever this was because of her. I don't know about any of that, but she did not want to talk about it after, and I just could never get her to elaborate any further. Me and this other friend, we were all about it, and we went back up there. Anna said that she wasn't going and wanted us to pack up the tent. And we'd sort of hung out, tried to look for tracks with our lights, listened, but nothing else ever happened. Honestly, I've gone from thinking that it was an alien like a grey to maybe a ghost or maybe a fairy or a gnome. One person said that it could have been a pukwudgie. These are like Native American gnome things that are tricksters and can turn invisible apparently. They're supposed to be in that area allegedly, but again, I don't know much about any of this stuff. All I know is that there was something invisible walking there that day, and I saw it with my own eyes and heard it with my own ears. My dad doesn't believe in the paranormal, like, at all. He's very logical, trying to see things with logic and common sense, but he is also religious. This encounter, though, is something that he really cannot explain, even to this day. His friends, they also witnessed this event, and I think that they were maybe around 8 to 10 kids and teenagers on that night when they went out. This encounter happened in Greece, in the Greco-Turkish border area during summer of 1969. The summer of 1969, the village my father was living in recently electrified that time, receiving power and commodities like street lamps. Before that time, much of the Greek countryside had no access to electricity or running water, so this was a huge upgrade for the village, along with its residents' living conditions. My dad, who was a kid back then, and his friends wanted to see how the village looked from afar with the lights at night. The area was pretty safe at the time, with no wildlife like wolves or bears around. There were also no real threats from people that existed at that time too for them. Parents allowed children to wander as much as they wanted, and children always came home safe. So my dad and his friends, around 8 to 10 children like I said, ages from like 5 to 15 or 16 I think, went on a trip to see the village at night. They left at sunset approximately, and at around midnight or a bit later, they decided to return. Now, the way back included passing from a strip of dirt road that was sinking for a few centimeters. There was a local legend too that this strip of dirt road was haunted by the spirit of a Greek collaborator's wife that was brutally murdered via getting spiked in a wooden pole by insurgents during World War II, the German occupation of the area. It was said that it took the form of an Orthodox priest apparently. There was a bulldozer parked in the spot. They were extracting gravel from this place or something, and when the group reached the spot, they stopped. They started feeling fearful, and the weather started getting really cold all of a sudden too. They started crossing slowly, feeling a bit afraid. To combat the fear though, they started speaking loudly and singing. They had crossed half the road when one of the children, one of the older ones, looked behind and then saw, from the bulldozer, an Orthodox priest in full uniform suddenly appear. The strange thing though was that the face wasn't visible, and it was hovering a few meters off the ground. It then started following the group in a steady pace with a distance of a few meters behind them. The guy froze in fear but didn't say anything so as to not upset the group and the young children that they had with them. But a bit later, another guy turned behind and saw the priest. He panicked and screamed, "Guys, there's a ghost." And at that, everybody panicked and started running. They ran approximately a distance of 2 and something kilometers, with the ghost following in a steady hovering pace a few meters behind them. When they reached the village's first street lamp, they were all exhausted underneath the light. The ghost stopped a few meters away behind them. For a few seconds, both the ghost and the kids just sort of stared at each other. Then, the ghost literally just vanished into thin air. Others had also seen the priest with the same description and characteristics at the time. It was a well-known legend from that time, and there are no modern reports or encounters with this specific ghost today, though. Some of the children died in following years due to old age or medical problems, but some are alive today, being grown-ups obviously, and have confirmed the story to be true to me, recalling the same events my father has told me. I think 2 or 3 others have actually confirmed the story. The area today is heavily guarded by border police and the military as well, and it's almost impossible to go to at night. It's also extremely dangerous due to illegal immigrants crossing the border with reports and incidents of robberies, etc., making an excursion to the site virtually impossible, and also extremely dangerous. This happened in the US, Virginia, near George Washington National Forest. It started off as a normal night, driving around back roads, blasting music, just hanging out and catching up with a friend when we pulled up to a sharp turn, and as soon as we started slowing down, I noticed something standing behind a tree at the turn. Its eyes were green and glowing, but when the lights from the car illuminated the tree, the figure stayed completely black, its eyes being the only thing glowing. Almost like the way light hits an object and is supposed to bounce off didn't work on its body. It was just like the light gets pulled into this darkness and not skin, like Vantablack but alive. At first, I honestly thought that it was a deer and I was misseeing things, but this is a gravel road where the tree line starts almost at the edge of the gravel, and when we got closer, I noticed this thing was tall. I'm not sure if it had antlers or if it was just the branches without leaves, but I'm 6'2" and this thing was as tall as me at least, probably even taller. I didn't say a thing because, quite honestly, I thought that I was hallucinating or something. And well, my friend took the turn slow because it was basically a right angle and then stopped. When she stopped in the middle of the road, she turned the music off and asked, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, I thought it was a deer at first, but it looked way too big to be one." She said that she was thinking something similar, so she started looking for her flashlight while I grabbed the baseball bat from the back seat. We got out and it had to have been at most 2 minutes that passed since we stopped. We walked to the same tree that we thought that we saw this thing, and we didn't see anyone or anything. We looked around for quite some time, but there was nothing. The tree that it was behind was quite small though. I mean, if you were a pretty big guy, it would barely cover your shoulders, if you were trying to hide behind it, that is. And for sure, it would not cover your belly, your nose, your butt, or anything like that if you were standing alongside of it. And well, at that, we got freaked out. We didn't hear anything like leaves rustling or sticks breaking from someone running, so we went back to the car and we left to go to our smoking spot for the night. It's basically just a pull-off down the side of some gravel road, but a little ways down where no one can see you. We got out of the car and I started drinking again, and then we heard what sounded like coyote howls and leaves rustling around us. So, being dumb 20-year-olds, we just opened the doors from the car and turned the music on full blast to try and scare them away. I went to pee at the front of the car, and when the music started blasting, we started dancing together in front of the headlights. We laughed about the fact that we were dancing right where I had peed, and we had a pretty good time. But I must admit, the whole time it just felt like we were being watched by something. That feeling you get when somebody's staring at you was just always there. But I guess we really didn't care at the time. I drew a picture at work the next day and I sent it to her, and she said it kinda does look like what she saw, but that she didn't want to talk about it anymore. I still don't know what it was, but I'm glad that she was sober because I thought that I was just seeing things. She still lives near where this happened and says that she hasn't seen it again, but later on in the winter, we went sledding at night. We work night shifts, so she usually does random stuff in the dead of the night, near her house, and when we were walking down a trail to get to a bigger hill, we heard loud bangs like a door being slammed open and shut. There was a full moon that night with snow on the ground, so you could still see pretty well at night, and there was a house on the top of the hill I noticed when I looked up. So I asked her if she thinks that her neighbors are mad, and well, then she told me that her neighbor had died recently, and that no one lives in that house now. We walked back to her place eventually, and we just kept sledding there instead. No feelings of being watched that time, but it was kind of weird to know that somebody had died in that house and we had seen whatever we saw that night not long ago. This is a small summary of the environment where the experience happened, just for context. I grew up with toxic parents and I developed depression through the years and cried a lot in the corner of my room. I attempted self-deletion twice there too. I shared my room with my younger sister who was badly abused by my mother. A lot of crying happened in that room from her side as well. This is to say that it was a very negative era in our lives, and during that time, I had multiple sleep paralysis episodes, and also believed that I experienced astral projection, even though at the time I thought that a spirit was trying to pull me out of my body. So, the story started when my younger sister went to visit my cousin, and my cousin told her that she was possessed by a demon, and showed her what the demon told her to do. It was a ritual to break up a couple in the neighborhood, among other things that included a mirror and smoke, etc. And her mother was moving from one psychiatrist to another to try to explain her behavior and treat her. The conclusion was that my cousin was schizophrenic because she saw and talked to someone that didn't exist. Just as a side note too, our family is the type of family that even if they did witness a demon face to face, they wouldn't believe it, and would try to get a medical or scientific explanation to it all. Anyway, my sister, 15 and female at the time, comes back from visiting my cousin terrified and told me, 22-year-old female at the time, all about what happened, and I'm like, okay, that's bull, but I listen to her and comfort her as much as I can. She swears that she felt a spirit during the rituals though, and I brushed it off saying that it was just psychological and my cousin is probably crazy and is seeing a doctor for that. Moving forward, my sister becomes convinced though that she is possessed by a spirit. She tells me that the spirit tells her things to help her, warn her about things and guide her. She starts not eating as much as she was and starts avoiding the bath, and after a while, the whole room starts smelling like rotten flesh. I would push her into the bathroom and force her to take a bath every week or so and deep clean the room every week, moving furniture, scrubbing walls, and the smell was only getting worse, and it was mostly coming from her side of the room. I was convinced that her hormones and the lack of showers were the reason, so I was making sure to shove her into the bathroom at least twice a week at this point, deep clean the room and provide all kind of deodorants and perfumes to her. The smell, though, was getting worse, and her behavior was getting worse too. Weirdly enough, too, she would know when my father would come home exactly by the minute. She would know as if it was a pop quiz. She would know where someone was going and why, and she would be able to talk pretty much anyone into doing whatever she wanted. There were a lot of weird things too, like she would always wake up tired, having the deepest black eyes and a lot of bruises as well. We ran all kind of blood work on her to fix it, but it all came back normal. She would find dead rats in her purse and other weird things too. So now to the experience. That night my sister, little sister, aged 5 at the time, came to sleep with us in our room, and I was in the living room studying until really late. By 2 a.m. or so, I decided to go to sleep, and I just had this weird feeling that I should avoid my room and that I should just stay away, but I brushed it off. I went to my room, and when I opened the door, it smelled horrible, like something had died in there, and there was no air, like it was hard to breathe. I opened the window to let some air in, but I felt no change. I stuck my nose in the window to breathe some fresh air, but there really was none. I decided to sleep anyway, and my body was screaming at me to leave the room. I grabbed my pillow and was going to the living room, and then I thought, no, spirits and ghosts are not real. This is all my little sister being terrified. The smell must be from the furniture being damp, and we just need to replace it and just figure it out in the morning. So in the end, I turned around and I stayed. I felt the air become very heavy when I laid down. I moved, and all of a sudden, it's hard to explain, but I felt like my hands were not mine. So I touched my body, and I felt as if something or someone else was touching me. It was freaky, and I opened my eyes, and it was then that I saw this giant black figure standing right at the end of my bed. It was so big and so black, like no light could be shed on it. I blinked and it didn't go away. I was like, okay, I'm very tired from not sleeping enough. This must all be in my head. So I turned my back to it and I tried to get some sleep. Now, I was sleeping eventually when I transitioned into what I believe was a dream. I woke up and the demon was there, very black, and an evil feeling was coming out of it. I ran to wake my sister, but the demon blocked me. So I ran to the door to find my mother, and I knocked on her door until she opened. I told her about what was going on, and she didn't care, and the demon was coming after me, so I ran to the bathroom to hide. And there I saw a flame in the mirror, so I ran back to my room, but I couldn't open the door anymore, so I just kept banging on it until I forced it open. And then my night lamp exploded and I woke up. When I woke up, I was obviously terrified, but the room just didn't smell as bad as before, at least as bad as when I went to sleep. And there was more light in the room instead of the pitch black before. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I stayed awake all night until the morning when everybody woke up, and I noticed that my sister was barely walking. She said that she was extremely tired and was bruised more than usual. I also noticed that the room door wouldn't close anymore. It had moved horizontally and somehow it didn't fit the door frame anymore or something, and nobody knows why. My lamp, it had actually exploded and my curtains were on the floor, and I noticed that they were pulled from the wall as if somebody had used a hammer to knock the hanging rods off. It was very weird, but I kept saying to myself that everything must have an explanation, until I went to have my breakfast. My 5-year-old sister said that she saw me and said, "Hey sis, there was a fairy just messing with your tummy and playing with it like with Play-Doh. I asked what fairy and what she meant, and she said, the flying black fairy. He is a fairy because he can fly. I asked her to describe the fairy, and she said that it was scary, so when she saw it, she just closed her eyes and started praying to God. More things happened afterward, like knocking on the walls, someone choking my mother for a few seconds. She was speaking about it randomly at dinner. My sister got even weirder until I moved out. I heard that my cousin, who was diagnosed schizophrenic at the age of 19, actually had a religious exorcism performed on her, and that afterward she wasn't seeing anything weird or talking to any invisible beings anymore. Her psychiatrist couldn't keep her on medication and said that she was spontaneously cured from schizophrenia afterward, after less than 2 years of being diagnosed. My cousin reached out to my sister and took her to the same exorcist, and now she's also fine too. The smell left the house, and we just never really talked about what happened. The house was blessed, and that was it. Like I said, we're not a religious family by any means, but it was like trying everything just for the sake of it, and I'm still a bit of an agnostic, I admit, but the experience definitely changed and shaped me. My mother talked about things that she experienced in that house too, but we never shared our experiences with her because, to be honest, I just don't think that she would believe us. Anyway, I would love to get your thoughts on what you think it was. Was it demonic? Was it a ghost? Was it nothing at all, and was it all in our heads? I would really like to get your opinions. This happened when I was a kid, and I double-checked the story with my family just to make sure that I have the details correct. This was in the mid-80s. I was about 7, at home with my 2 older sisters, 8 and 11-ish, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8-ish, all 5 girls. My sister, 11, was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to have the picture of what our house looked like to understand what happened too. It was a 2-story box house with a flat roof and a small box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house and we just kept hearing noises coming from the roof, like walking and what sounded like rocks being dropped down from the downspouts or something. And you know kids, right? We thought of a squirrel or something, but it just kept happening. Then my older sister said something about how maybe somebody climbed the huge tree beside the house and got on the roof. We were all scared because we knew that there was roof access, a point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters, and what if he could get inside? My older sister told my other sister and one of my other cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, across an empty gravel parking lot, and on the way back look up and see if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls, both 8 years old, walk about halfway across the parking lot and, being curious kids, turned around, looked up, and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s sort of crop top football jerseys. Think Johnny Depp in Nightmare on Elm Street. And he was crouched down on the roof just staring. The girls came running home freaking out and told my older sister about the guy. My older sister, freaking out too, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on the roof, but couldn't see anything. She came home and then called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up, but when they got there, I don't think that they believed a word that we said. They thought a bunch of little kids were making up this story for attention, but one cop drove down the road, up a hill about a block away, to see if they could see anything, but the way the roof was, you couldn't really see a person if they were laying down. Then these cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls from ages 7 to 11 sent upstairs, scared out of our minds, crying to look for this guy, knowing about the roof access. We all cried, not wanting to go, but they said that we had to. To this day, I remember how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us, didn't even check out the house, inside or out, and left. We were so scared to be left home with this guy out there. I mean, who knows where he was at this point. We didn't know if he was laying down on the roof or jumped down or somehow got in and was hiding. My mum finally got home a few hours later and we told her what happened immediately, and my mum explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access and that nobody could get in, but she checked anyways. She went out to check on the outside roof, and there were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good from him jumping off the roof onto the porch and off into the flower bed. My mum was absolutely steaming mad when she realized that we had told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the police station the next day and we were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mum went up one side of the cops and down the other, and we never found out who the guy was or why he was there. Did he know that it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? I'm not sure, but it's definitely freaky to think about. Before my parents split up, we used to live in a mini mansion near a man-made lake. It had a massive garden and was surrounded by land with some water and lots of wild ducks. When my brother was still a toddler, before I was born, he fell into one of these lakes and nearly drowned. If it weren't for my uncle who saw him, he would have died for sure. When he got pulled out of the water, he was talking about some naked fish lady or something that was there staring at him. Everyone being shocked about what had just happened, they didn't bat an eyelid about this lady and just made sure that he was okay. Well, a few years later, when I was like 3 and my sister was around 11, she would occasionally complain to my parents about this lady who would visit her sometimes at night. She was always wet, naked, and something to do with being aquatic. She also mentioned that sometimes the husband showed up too, but was not very nice and she didn't really like him. When this woman wasn't visiting, she would be somewhere singing though. Every single night my sister would talk about hearing singing, and the neighbors' kids would also mention it too. The parents thought that the kids were just trying to scare them, so they didn't really care, but it's this next part that really freaks me out. So fast forward to when I'm like about 12, we get into contact with the people who now own that house, as we moved out a long time ago, and we never had mentioned this mermaid lady to them. But as we're leaving and saying our goodbyes, they start talking about this lady who sings and visits them at nighttime, who's always wet and sort of appears like a fish. We have never been able to figure this out, as there is just no way that they could have known about how we used to see things like that. It's the same house, just 10 to 15 years later, but that is startling to say the least. So, does anyone have any ideas as to what this could actually be? This happened when I was 7 years old. I know that memory can be tricky, but I have also thought about this experience pretty much every day since it happened. It's less important to me if this experience was real or not, and more important to me that whatever it was, it had a significant, long-lasting impact on my life. And the crazy thing is, it only lasted for a few seconds. So, it was the night before or early morning of January 25th, 1999. It was in Central California, and I only know the exact date because it was the only time it snowed here, in a really long time anyway. So you can still Google the newspaper articles about it. Anyway, basically what happened was, I woke up, sat up straight in bed, and crouching on the bed, one knee bent on the bed and one leg off the bed, was a typical grey alien. Large head, big black eyes. To me, the skin looked greenish-grey and had an almost rubbery or just very smooth texture. No nose, slit for a mouth, no visible ears, and I remember it not wearing any clothing, it seemed. It just stared at me, and I just remember feeling sort of shocked, like not enough time to even feel terrified. That came the days, weeks, or months after. For whatever reason, I just sort of laid back down, turned on my side, put the covers over my head, and I guess I must have fallen asleep. Now, the whole next day, I was thankfully partially distracted by a rare snow day, but I also was very aware that I would not be able to go to sleep without feeling petrified for a very long time. I thought about telling my parents, but I just didn't have a word for, well, what I had seen. No reference for it. I didn't know what an alien or a grey was. For a lack of a better word, it was totally alien and just unknown to me. It wasn't until I was at my friend's house, whose dad was watching a sci-fi movie that had typical greys in it, that I learned to associate what I had seen with the word alien, and that they were at least real enough to be depicted on TV. And then, of course, that's when I started noticing them everywhere, in shows, movies, art, etc. I accept that this could have been a hallucination or a very vivid nightmare or whatever. Maybe I had seen them depicted on a TV before and my subconscious just picked up on it or something, but it is the single event that led to a lifelong obsession with aliens and unexplained phenomena. Sometimes I wonder if that was the whole point of that experience in the first place, or if that's a part of the reason why they appear to people, just so stories about them will continue to influence our culture, our mythos, and our spirituality. Whatever the case may be, I appreciate you guys hearing me out, and thanks for listening. So I had an unexplainable incident happen to me while hunting several years back. I was new to the area and drew my first antelope tag in an area known as the Red Desert, and I specifically scouted a remote location known as Bison Basin to hunt in. This area is probably one of the most remote areas in the lower 48, and also a great area for antelope hunting. But all that is really out there is some oil and gas production and uranium mining ops too. Long story short, I shot an antelope about 150 yards away from me and 200 yards from my truck. I walked out to where it dropped and filled out and attached my tag, and that's when I looked up and noticed off in the distance on the horizon a bright light moving quickly. It was hard to gauge the speed because it was probably a good 10 miles off in the distance. You can see for miles in all directions out here. One thing to note though is that time and distance intervals are important to this story. With antelope meat, it is important to get the animal cooled off as quickly as possible, or else the meat can taste kind of, well, funky, I guess you could say. So I was in a rush to get the animal dressed and back to my truck so that I could pack the body cavity with ice. That being said, I tagged the buck, looked up, and saw the light on the horizon thinking nothing of it, and I quickly went to work field dressing. In a matter of 30 to 45 seconds, I would say, I had opened up the body cavity and removed the guts, and that's when I glanced up and noticed about maybe a mile away, or perhaps even less, that the light that I had seen in the distance was approaching me with incredible speed. So in that 30 to 45 seconds, that light must have covered a distance of what I estimate to have been 9 miles, and it was approaching me at this speed too. I couldn't tell what I was looking at as the light was very bright and flying over the top of the sagebrush and making no sound. As the light got to within about 200 yards of me, I would say, after observing it for a few seconds, I could make out what it was. It was a rectangular shape of polished metal, about 5 feet tall by 2 to 3 feet wide, like a dressing mirror, and it was reflecting the setting sun, which was behind me, back at me. The flying object then dropped down below the sage, and I just couldn't see it anymore. Again, it made no sound, but it was close enough to me that I should have heard engine noise at least. Obviously, I was spooked and I was pretty shook. I wanted to get back to my truck and leave, but I had to take the animal, so I bent over and hid below the sagebrush line, and quickly finished field dressing and grabbed the leg, and I just took off running, dragging the antelope back towards my truck. This all took a matter of 1 to 1.5 minutes before I was completely gassed, so I stopped, looked back to see if the light was anywhere to be seen, and I could now see the light blasting off in the opposite direction. Again, back 8 to 9 miles, going towards the horizon, moving faster than anything could possibly travel over that terrain. It was still reflecting the setting sun back at me, and it eventually disappeared over the horizon after a couple of seconds, and I finished dragging the animal to the truck, and I just got the heck out of there. I don't know what I saw, but I know that it was not a drone, SXS, or any kind of low-flying plane. I definitely would have heard the engine noise being that close, and that terrain could not be covered at that speed by any kind of wheeled vehicle, that much is clear. I even went as far to ask Fish and Game and the uranium miners if they ever operated any kind of drones that could perform like that, and they said no, but I am 100% sure that that was no drone. I haven't been back to the area since, and I don't have any plans to do so. So my house is well known for being haunted, and there has been deaths, murders, etc. in my house. But tonight was definitely the straw that broke the camel's back. You see, my wife is frequently home alone because I work in the next town over, and my mother-in-law does home health. Tonight, she was just scrolling on Facebook when her phone started to go crazy, randomly opening apps, even after she closed everything out, and she said that a male voice came through her phone and said hello multiple times and echoed, but also sounded like it was right there. This is not the first time anything paranormal has happened in our house, but for this to keep happening when she is home by herself is quite frankly starting to tick me off. I've told whatever it is on multiple occasions that it's not welcome, nor is it allowed to attach to anybody in this house, including our animals, and to leave us all alone and leave our house. We have crystals in the house that give great energy and have really helped the energy of the house and the flow at that. But it just seems like the paranormal activity is starting to ramp up again, and I'm beyond over it, because last night we were watching TV and watched a white object fly past our window when our window is way too tall for any average person, especially in our area of old people. Plus, to fly by the window like that, especially from that angle which comes straight from a wall towards the street, it just makes no sense. I've woken up in the middle of the night and I saw a face hovering next to the TV that swooped down towards me but stopped about 3 feet from me and vanished into thin air. We have heard footsteps, seen a child with razor-sharp teeth in the back room twice. It's always been the same child back there, and for a little bit of history, the mayor of our town at one point was beat to death in the driveway here. A college student OD'd in one of the bedrooms. Multiple family members have passed away in the house from natural causes, and a man and his wife had an argument because he was cheating here. He got drunk, she apparently killed him, and he walked through the house leaving blood that was still in the house when my wife and her family moved in. He apparently bled out and died in the front porch in a folding chair. And while none of the three, between the mayor, the college student, and the man who was stabbed by his wife, have ever been violent or even scary, whatever this thing is that is continuing to mess with my wife, I want it gone and I don't know what to do. Which is why I'm here. Can anyone tell me what this might be, and how to possibly get rid of it and banish it out of our house? I don't want my family to live in fear, and I don't want to have to worry every time that I leave the house too. I'm worried that something crazy is going to happen when I'm not there, and there's going to be nothing that I can do about it. So, any and all help is very much appreciated, and a huge thank you in advance. I work in a care home in the UK, and I work nights. I used to work evenings, but it all started with just footsteps behind me, particularly when I was on my own. Then they started scratching my head and tapping it. I then changed to night shifts, and certain things started popping up that all night staff have seen. Like one night, maybe about a year ago, I was walking down a staircase, and to my right is a corridor that leads to a dead end. I looked down the corridor and I saw a figure. She was almost glowing, and she was so white that she had no face and very straggly hair. She was peeping out of a doorway of a bathroom. I could only see her head and upper body. Although she had no face, it felt like she was watching me, so I turned to call out for my coworker, but when I glanced back, she was gone. She doesn't bother me too much. She seems nice, I guess, and I've never worried about seeing her again, and I haven't. Another spirit is what staff call the Shadow Man. He lurks behind and in corners, and he only gets very close to one staff member who I regularly work with. I've only seen him in one of the front entrances, and I froze, and so did he. One night, though, me and this one coworker were doing the cleaning in the corridor with all the living rooms. We were standing there having a rant about general stuff that was annoying us, I guess, but for context, the spirits never like us being negative, it seems. And as we were ranting, all the living rooms started making really loud noises, all at once. I felt brave and told them to shut up. I turned away from the noise, and this one coworker told me the Shadow Man was directly behind me. I didn't look, so I don't know if he was, but the noise quieted down because we'd stopped our discussion, but when we started up again, it started as well. Other sort of things happened too, where we would be hearing a man shout "help me" with no man around as we were in a corridor filled with ladies who were asleep. Another time would be when I was walking out of the kitchen and all of the cutlery started banging around. I run really quickly and refuse to be in that kitchen once it's dark outside. Another is the people we see sat in the chairs in our peripheral vision, but when we look, nobody's ever there. Then there's the whistling that happens so close to us, but we have to pretend not to hear it because it just feels really wrong. Another time is that I sat in the staff room on my own and something said my name in my ear, but I ignored it. Then when I'm in the laundry room, I can hear things in the corridor like walking frames, even when everybody is asleep. Another time, there was screaming upstairs and we couldn't find the source of it anywhere. It was like when we went to one end of the corridor, it screamed on the opposite side, and then we'd be going back and forth without finding the person screaming. On another shift, we sat in the staff room at around 5 a.m. and there was a walking stick sound in the corridor. We went out to see if anybody was there and awake, but they weren't. Another night, me and another coworker are doing normal resident assistance, and we're both working with one person. I suddenly start hearing banging noises, but my other coworker couldn't hear it. At first I ignored it, after my coworker said that she didn't hear anything, and summed it up to an overactive imagination. It then began getting louder though, and I turned to my coworker and said someone must be breaking in or something. She told me to look out of the front window as there's a view to the main entrance there, but nobody was there. Again, I tried to ignore it. When we left this particular room, we decided to go up to the corridor, and then we passed the bathroom that I previously said that I saw a peeping woman from. The door was closed this night. Suddenly, the door starts banging really loudly and shaking. At that, we both ran back down the corridor as we were both scared. All alarms were on doors, so we knew that no residents were awake. And quite honestly, I still have no idea what is actually in that bathroom. Another night, I was on shift again walking down that same corridor with a staff member. We had done our hourly checks on all residents and suddenly start hearing on a loop, help me," over and over again in a woman's voice. At first we think it's a resident and instantly start checking rooms frantically, but nobody is awake. We can still hear the "help me" though. It was after checking rooms that we listened closely and neither of us actually recognized the voice. We didn't leave each other's side all night that night because it was pretty terrifying. Now, I left the care home temporarily about 3 months ago and I can go back at any point, but genuinely it is a terrifying place. I'm not very good at telling stories, and I'm sorry if this is a bit of a ramble of all things weird and creepy, but I've always wondered what is in the home and how aware they are of their surroundings. I don't like that they know my name, and they also seem to target night staff. That's a bit creepy, and I just really, really hope that nothing ever follows me home. I live in PNW in a fairly populated but still mountain town. I specifically live on 425 feet of riverfront. So last night at around 9:30 p.m., myself and my partner started hearing an initially distant, indistinguishable voice screaming in a state of panic and distress. We live near a popular trailhead, and a few times over the years, people have somehow wandered down our road late at night, sometimes a little bit tipsy and sometimes in small groups, sometimes transient. So, when we started to hear an erratic voice, we got up, started initially checking the parameters of our house and the road, but there was absolutely nobody out there. However, over the course of the next couple of minutes, the voice got louder and louder and obviously closer, and it was screaming at the top of its lungs for help. I say help in parentheses because it was a little difficult to make out, but it sounded like a not fully enunciated help. Whatever it was clearly in extra distress, screaming for its life distress, yelling help. We could only make out help like help with a soft P, if that makes sense, but the words sounded the exact same every time. There was no variance or other sounds, just the word help, back to back in the most distressed voice that I've ever heard. With how quickly the screams were approaching and a weird echo to them as well, we quickly realized whatever was screaming for help was actually in the river. It was actively being pulled down the river current. Our river is wide, fast-moving and dangerous this time of year. There was no other way for a voice to be approaching so rapidly and from the location that it was, unless it were in the river. We see and hear a lot of kayakers and know how their voices travel down there as well. So over the course of about 3 minutes, we hear what was a distant cry for help, work up to the point that it's so loud that it sounded a few feet away, then slowly softer until we can no longer hear the screaming. Again, this sounds like a deep middle-aged man's voice, and the screams are maybe about 2 to 3 seconds apart, just back to back. At first, we tried to convince ourselves that it was an animal. We do see a lot of wildlife here after all. A herd of elk practically lives on our property, and we see bears and wildcats too. We initially thought maybe a young elk fell in the river, but no. We googled just about every animal distress call, scream, fight sounds, etc., anything really, and nothing even came close. I've always heard that coyotes can scream like people, but it was definitely not an older man. I've heard bears can yelp deep, however, they have absolutely no definition to their calls, and elk are way more high-pitched, and same for all local wildcats. Even the birds of prey and ravens that can mimic sounds cannot sound like this voice did. Initially, I called the non-emergency line because I wanted to convince myself that it was an animal. However, they quickly patched me over to 911 and said that I was apparently the third call for the same thing. So apparently the voice was strange and concerning enough that my even more wilderness-raised and savvy neighbors, they were concerned, and the police department took it very seriously. Then, the more that I thought and thought about it, I started to think that if I was in a freezing river fighting for my life screaming for help, I might not yell as clearly as possible, due to the pure state of panic, distress, and attempt to stay afloat. The more I thought about it, the more I was sure that it was a person though. 911 sent out 2 police officers. They were extremely nice and they took the call very seriously, but with just 2 of them, all they had were flashlights and a chainsaw, and they kinda just walked down to a few spots at the river and peeked around a bit. When our city has a genuine suspicion of a person in the river or a lost hiker, they send search and rescue and the helicopter, but they didn't do this night. I told my partner that I wouldn't be surprised if the next morning when it's daylight, somebody finds a body at that river spot. But it's getting later in the morning and I've kept my eye on the police scanner and the local media as well, and I just haven't seen anything. Now I'm back to really hoping that it was just a wild animal, but tell me, does anyone know of a wild animal that could sound like that? What are the chances if this was a human man that he pulled himself out somewhere down the line and got some help, or do we think that it's just a matter of time until someone reports him missing or we find a body down the river? Also, just a minor update is that within the last 15 minutes, a helicopter has begun tracing up and down the river and circling at an area a ways past my house. So I'm feeling a little bit discouraged that it likely was actually a human. That being said, I haven't seen anything on any social media, and usually my local police post updates about stuff like this, if it was a human, very quickly. Also, the locals usually buzz about things like this on social media, and I haven't seen anything posted yet. I'm not sure what's going on at the moment, but this whole situation is, well, pretty creepy to say the least. I live alone with a 7-month-old, non-walking child. Things have been getting, well, progressively weirder too, the longer that I stay here. To start, believe me or not, I have a history of seeing ghosts. In my first week here, I saw a little girl peek her head into my doorway in my bedroom. Now, if you don't believe that, I'll give you some more, but things have been randomly disappearing out of my home, like little things. Baby toys, earrings, etc. At first I just wrote it off as me misplacing things. Easy enough. Then today things spiked big time. A lot of things I'd been missing completely out of nowhere just sort of appeared on the floor of my living room. Like right in the middle of the floor. Tonight, I come home from a day out with my boyfriend and I notice my lights were off. With a weird encounter the night before, or someone knocking on my door last night, I called a friend and had him walk me through the house to be sure, because I leave my lights on all the time. I'm terrified of the dark, so I just leave the lights on at all times. The apartment is clear and the door was locked when I entered though, and after a couple of hours I go to the bathroom and I realize that my phone has been recording audio on a social media app for over 10 minutes while I was staring right at it, even using it in fact. I listen back to the audio and you can hear me texting and using the phone when on Snapchat. You sort of have to press and hold the audio record button to send a voice message. Then when I go to wash my hands, my bathroom sink is covered in black soot. I don't work a dirty job and I have zero idea of where all that black soot came from, as I haven't washed anything like that off of me anytime recently and I'm kind of obsessive about keeping my sink clean. And I mean, it's all up and down my sink and the backsplash and just everywhere. Then, my daughter starts screaming like I've hardly heard her scream that bad. So I go make her a bottle and when I go into the kitchen, the only burner with something on it was on high heat. My stove has buttons instead of knobs, so this is extremely unlikely to have been an accident. Over the last couple of days, the stove's timer has been randomly going off and it sounds like an old apartment buzzer, so it's really loud and it always scares the life out of me too. So, I'm wondering what I can do about this. I'm a terrified single mother and my apartment doesn't have any smoke alarms, it's very old and I'm actually pretty scared about what might happen here. Any advice is appreciated as I try to figure out what the heck is going on here. I've recently moved back to my hometown of McLaren Vale in South Australia, after a decade away. I still think back to this particular night too, as I still struggle to comprehend what we saw, as does my childhood mate. So, in November of 2011, I drove to pick up my friend for a sleepover. I had just recently gotten my P-plates and we reveled in the newfound freedom. At approximately 8 p.m, we were driving back toward McLaren Vale of Main South Road, turning left, and just as we started along the road near CPB compound, I stopped dead in the middle of the road. I couldn't believe my eyes, in fact. My friend was typing away on her iPhone and I stuttered, "Mate, what is that?" She didn't look up and I hit her in a panic with my arm, and annoyed, she broke her concentration and looked up to humour me. She went pale. Her little voice squeaked, only managing a whisper through her fear. "Dude, what is that?" There, crouched down about 10 feet in front of my hatchback, was a pale, thin thing. Is that a kangaroo that's been hit? I tried to reason. No, definitely not. It was tall, at least 6 foot, along being bent up. This thing was hunched over, thin arms and legs, a torso like a human, its skin pale, near blue-grey, translucent almost. Its bones were completely visible through its paper-thin flesh. We could see every single rib, in fact. Its head was bare except for its black eyes, void black. They didn't reflect any light from the car headlights, too. No nose, just 2 holes, no lips but a wide gaping mouth, and when it opened to hiss or snarl, about 50 to 100 ape-like sharp teeth seemed to point out from its mouth, pointed like daggers. Its hands were sort of human, long, almost black on the ends of its fingers. Human feet, but absolute talons where the toes should have been. Being 2 teenage girls, we were absolutely terrified, frozen still in our tracks. My hands gripped the steering wheel, unsure whether to go forward or back. My friend began to panic. This thing, though, just stared us down, growling, opening and closing its mouth over and over, almost like it was warning us not to do anything stupid. We must have sat there locked eyes with this thing for at least 2 minutes. It then stepped to the left of us. I decided to slowly crawl to the right and move around it. My friend almost jumped into my lap as I tried to calm her down while steering the car around this thing. It bared its teeth as we inched closer. It looked into the car as we came up right beside it, and it looked absolutely rageful, like it hated us. It slowly crawled on all fours like a human would toward the bush, and we watched it as it disappeared just into the darkness, and we didn't see it again. We sped home as fast as we could in my little car, and when we got home, my parents didn't believe us, obviously, despite how terrified we were. They assumed that we must have been smoking or something and just saw something else. But I brought this up with my friend during lockdowns during 2021. I think